VocalEye Almost Live Zoom. Post Hypnotic Press Digital Library. Hosted by Amy Amantea. With special guest, Carlyn Craig.
Welcome to you all to this wonderful VocalEye Almost Live event. My name's Amy Amantea. Pronouns are she, her, and I am the Associate Director here at VocalEye. I'm your host for these Almost Live events, and I'm a proud member of the blind community. And as I do every week, you hear it every week. It makes no difference what Wednesday we're joining. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to all of you who join us in these spaces, to those of you who have made financial donations to this programming that VocalEye offers, to those of you who have written beautiful, lovely testimonials to share with us. All of this gets shared with our funders, and knowing the impact that this programming makes on you hits near and dear. We read all of them. So thank you so much. If you want to make a financial contribution and you have capacity to do so, there's always a link that's posted in the chat, but it's also in our newsletters and in our emails that go out. So I just wanted to wish folks, wish you, but to just honor and thank you for all of the contributions that have been made in any way, big or small. I don't even think there's such a thing as a small contribution. So don't be afraid if $5 is all that you can contribute, because that's where I was for many years, just showing my gratitude. So thank you to everybody who's made contributions. For folks who are joining us on our YouTube channel, we wish you were here in the space live, but we know that not everybody can make it in the space. But we absolutely hope that you can hover over to those like and subscribe buttons and just click on them for us. That would be super helpful in supporting VocalEye and what we do here to make arts accessible for folks who are blind and partially sighted. And as always, I want to share my land acknowledgement with you, and that is that VocalEye is broadcasting from the traditional and stolen lands of the Coast Salish peoples, in particular the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And every week I try and think about something that is relevant maybe to the content that we're going to be sharing. And tonight we're going to be doing some sharing around storytelling. And so I wanted to share with you some of the things that I recently learned about the significance of storytelling and the method of the storytelling within Indigenous cultures. So storytelling serves as a connection between individuals, between communities, and between their place in time as well as their place on the land and their place within each other. Stories are also used to teach history, cultural etiquette, and spiritual beliefs. At the heart of each story within the storytelling sort of model in Indigenous culture is a lesson. And that lesson can be in relationship with other people, in relationship with weather, in relationship with self, in relationship with the environment and the land that you're on. But there's always some kind of lesson to be learned to be in relationship. And I thought that was a really lovely message. And as we listen to our story audiobook samplings this evening, so some storytelling, I think I'm really going to be paying attention to what my relationship is with each of these pieces. And with that, I welcome you to this Wednesday, June the 28th, 2023, and our number 126th Almost Live event. I can't even believe it. That number just keeps ticking up. And tonight our special guest in the space is Carlyn Craig from Post Hypnotic Press. So let's welcome Carlyn to the space. Welcome, Carlyn. We're going to highlight your square. There's Carlyn. So Carlyn, welcome to our VocalEye Almost Live event. How are you this evening?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. I'm really pleased to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. We sort of in the periphery had you here before, in that when we had Karen Carnival here with her book on Constance, that was an audiobook created by Post Hypnotic Press, and so there's a connection, right?
That's right.
And thought it would be nice to invite you back to do a little bit of an audiobook sampling. We got a lot of friends in the space that are avid readers, and so maybe give us a little bit of background, Carlyn, on what Post Hypnotic Press is and your relationship to it, and I'm curious to learn more.
Okay. I want to make a quick note, though.
Sure.
Adam Henderson produced Karen's book, and we're the
Ah,
publisher. And
thank
that's
you.
actually kind of rare for us. That's something that's just been happening now. Up until now, for the last 10 years, we've been producing all of our own audiobooks as well as producing and publishing for other companies. So I
Hmm.
got interested in audiobooks back when my son was very young. And I had my mother-in-law lived with us, and she had late stages Parkinson's disease.
Hmm.
I had a full-time job. I was a managing editor of a scholarly journal. I had a young son at home. And as you can imagine, I was exhausted. And every time I tried to read, I would literally fall asleep within a sentence or two.
Hmm.
And then my son, who had an incredible vocabulary by the time he was very young, and I just assumed he would learn to read easily, he wasn't learning to read. And a bunch of things sort of came together at the same time. My exhaustion, my need to do something for him because I was reading to him for an hour or 2 hours a day. He was getting all of my awake reading time, and I couldn't keep up with his needs by 6 years old. Actually, maybe it's a little bit before that. But in any case, we discovered he had a really serious eye tracking issue. And that meant that his eyes weren't tracking together. So when he tried to read, the words would literally bounce around on the page for him.
Hmm.
And we were able to fix that problem. But it got me interested in the whole connection between, there's just so much that goes into reading. And then even my own, my need for books. So that's how I kind of got into audiobooks. And once I had been really resistant. I didn't need audiobooks. I had thought of myself as a big reader. Once I got into them and started listening to them, I absolutely fell in love with the medium and started to plot, like literally within two books, my first two audiobooks, I started to plot starting my own company and doing this myself. So that's sort of the background of how I got into it. It was a kind of a bunch of events coming together to push me in that direction, literally. And then all my life, I would set out in a direction and then I'd find myself going 180 degrees from that goal.
Right.
This was the first time I made a goal, and that didn't happen. I
Mm.
decided that I wanted to do this. I started to research it. We needed to move because the house we were in wasn't really adequate to my mother-in-law's care. We found a house that we all fell in love with, and it had a recording studio in the basement. That was the 112 Royal Avenue. It had a beautifully built recording studio that the woman had been doing voiceover for commercials and cartoons. So
Hmm.
it was really professionally built. It was just so serendipitous. And we loved the house. It was a beautiful heritage house. It actually just was moved to a new location. So they literally picked up our old house and put it onto Royal and drove it through New West, and it's now living at a new address. So all these things came together when I decided what I wanted to do. Then the business itself kind of came together really quickly. My husband's an actor, so and a very good audiobook narrator. So we had lots of friends in the community. Um, so we started to work with friends and actors that we know and produce audiobooks. I reached out in the beginning mainly to Canadian audiobooks because I really wanted to see more Canadian product in audio. But what I discovered after about 40 books was that Canada in 2010 wasn't ready for audiobooks yet. So after about 40 Canadian books, we started to look around and publish different stuff. So we have a really eclectic catalog of like public domain titles and backlist titles and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so
What a wild ride.
yeah,
Yeah.
so we've been doing it for 10 years now. Yeah.
And you're joining us today from an audio booth. I can hear it. I can hear the professional sound quality. So this is where people would come in and record.
That's right. So this is our second studio, our ISO booth is what it really is. This is at my brother Carl's place. My brother Carl's a musician and also a web designer. So when I wanted to do this, and he's my twin actually, when I
Mm.
wanted to do this, I had the publishing background. He had the technical knowledge. So right now I'm sitting in our ISO booth at his place. Obviously the booth at 112 is gone. But that's what you can see in the background is our uh, audio egg eggshell foam. So
Mm-hmm.
this is basically a 4x6 box. It's not very big. It's just big enough to sit in. Um, it gets quite hot in here because this was a homemade one. We made this in 2017, and it doesn't have proper ventilation. So I may be flapping at myself every once in a while. But yeah, that's what this is. We have one of our condenser mics. I'm not sure which one, and a pop screen and sort of built-in shelf, and it's quite a neat little space to sit in. Actually, I don't sit in here very often. I'm normally outside of the booth.
So now you're coming to us from inside the booth. I love it.
Yeah, inside the booth.
Inside the booth.
Yeah.
Um,
So
but you're going to be in a new location soon.
that's right. So this will be moving. I don't know if we'll be able to salvage. We'll probably salvage the parts from this, but this one is self-built, so it's
Mhm.
glued together. So I was thinking we could probably move it, but I doubt it. I think we're going to have to deconstruct it. In our new location, we're moving to a spot in Burnaby. We'll have a separate suite downstairs, and we'll have two custom-built modular audio booths. And so they're going to be um, well, I don't think that they'll necessarily give us better sound than this because we've done a lot of tailoring to this booth over the years. The advantage of those is that they'll probably be slightly bigger, they'll have proper ventilation, and I'll have two of them and not
Mhm.
one, and two in the same location. So we hope to we work with a lot of self-published authors these days. So in 2018, Audible opened up in Canada, and from 2018 on, the interest in audiobooks in Canada has really grown. I mean, it's one of the one areas of publishing that has continued to grow since I got interested in 2010, and even before that. I would say it's been growing for 30 years,
Right.
starting off with when people used to have cassettes,
Yep.
and you know, actually, the very first audiobook is the very first thing Edison recorded. He recorded Mary Had a
Interesting.
Little Lamb. That was his very first recording, and many consider that to be the very first audiobook. And it was his number two reason in his patent for his phonograph. He didn't, if music was number four, which
Huh.
I found really amazing, right?
That is
So,
amazing.
yeah, but he saw it always as like, this is going to be great. If you look back, as early as the 1880s, you start to see speculation, or even before that. I was doing a speech for a conference down in the US recently. And so I was looking at all of this history, and they were imagining spoken books before the phonograph was even really quite visualized. So one guy had imagined them as bottled books. And there's a picture from about 1880. There's this guy in this funny looking outfit, and he's got two kind of cables hanging from his ears, but they kind of go nowhere. Or maybe they went into a bottle, but they imagined them as being in a bottle or something like that that you could carry around. But they were imagining the idea of listening to books before the 20th century, which I find really fascinating.
That is
Um,
really fascinating. Yeah.
yeah.
That's a trivia
So,
question.
yeah, that's right.
Now
Yeah,
everybody knows what was considered the first ever audiobook? Mary Had a Little Lamb by
yeah,
Edison.
by Edison. That's right. Yeah, the narrator,
The
narrated
narrator.
by Thomas Edison. Yeah, I mean, I found that really fascinating that they envisioned it so long ago, and music was down on the scale. I think they couldn't imagine listening to like an orchestra
Mm.
through something, but somebody telling a story made more sense. And maybe it
Mhm.
also is just a testament to the importance of storytelling, and the way that we used to like oral history has been so important. You were just mentioning
Yes.
First Nations, right?
Yeah,
That's all oral history that's told
that's
through
right.
storytelling. But even if we go back again to before like the turn of the century, the last one, um, not everybody was literate. Like they might
Mhm.
be literate to a point, but it was not unusual to have somebody in your circle, whether you were talking, the very poorest to the very richest, who would be a good reader, who would read at night out loud, and
Mhm.
everybody would enjoy the book that way. And I've even read of slaves having somebody that had illegally learned to read, and then he would secretly be reading to everybody else who couldn't partake of the book because they couldn't read.
Mhm.
So storytelling is so ingrained and so important and fundamental, I think, to human culture. How what we tell stories we tell about ourselves shapes our culture.
Mm.
You know.
I think that's a great place to launch into this first book that you want to share with us because it's Canadian iconic book.
Yes.
So you go ahead. You tell us why you chose this one and what one we're going to listen to.
Okay, so the first one we're listening to is a book that we recorded early on. It's one of, in my opinion, the best recordings of Anne of Green Gables out there by Colleen Winton. Colleen Winton has a long history. She's a wonderful Canadian actress and musical theater um, person, and she had actually played Anne as a young actress. And when
Mhm.
she was recording this, she was playing the older character, and I'm blanking on her name. What's the isn't that terrible? This happens to me from time to time. We'll hear her name in this short story, but the she was playing the woman who adopts Anne.
Oh, yeah. Matthew and his sister. What was his
Yeah,
sister's name?
I know. I'm blanking on his
Oh,
sister's name. I want to say Margala, but it's not. It's
oh.
Margulis. Anyway, so she was playing
We'll all
that
go, oh,
character.
that's her name.
I'm sorry, I'm blanking on that. But yeah, so she was playing her at the time, and she recorded 3 of the
Marilla.
Anne Green.
Marilla. It just
Marilla,
came to me.
thank you,
Marilla.
thank you. So she was playing Marilla
Yeah.
in Saskatchewan, I think, at the time. But also Colleen is just such a gifted actress, and she
Hmm.
really, these are books that were meant a lot to her in her life, and the narration is just to die for. It's wonderful. So we're going to hear chapter 2 when uh, he goes to pick up Anne.
Oh, I'm excited to listen to this. And then we'll talk a little bit about it afterwards as well. We also have a cover art that we're going to put up so that people aren't those folks who have partial sight and for the benefit of the recording don't see our lovely mugs. Well, while we're listening to them, we're not distracted by us picking our teeth or whatever funny thing we might be doing in the background. So there's going to be a cover art that Rick's going to bring up, and maybe I'll get Rick to bring that up now if that's possible. And maybe Carlyn, do you mind just describing this quickly for us? Just
Yeah,
pretty
so
simple.
what we have here is that's Colleen in the top right corner. And
Hmm.
then these are the covers that I created for our audiobooks. All of the artwork comes from earlier editions of Anne of Green Gables, and I really wanted to have that feeling. And then what I was trying to do here is create the look of like a little box that you could open up because you open up the audiobook and listen in a sense, right?
Hmm.
So that's what those little lockets are. I don't know how successful it is, but I quite like these covers.
So it's kind of it's a square with four different photos in it, and the narrator, of course, is one of them. And she's got pale skin and maybe strawberry blonde colored hair, perhaps short
Yeah,
haircut.
she's got strawberry blonde hair.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the others seem to me to be kind of like an illustration of
That's right. We
maybe
have
Anne.
Anne. Yeah, we have Anne standing balancing on a rooftop. That's an illustration
That
from an
sounds just
earlier
like
version.
Anne. Yeah.
That's right. We have Anne of Avonlea, so she's a little older there. She's got a summer hat on and a beautiful white dress, and the hat has a long, uh, what would you call that? A kind of a long lacy tie that makes a
Oh, because
sort of
you would tie it
scarf.
under your
You
chin,
would
right?
tie it under your chin, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the last one is Anne of the Island. So that's when Anne is older,
Hmm.
and that's sort of a portrait of Anne on the cover there, just looking more older and serious.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to have our friends listen to this, and because I think there's many Anne of Green Gables lovers probably in the room, and there's probably, as you say, there's been many recordings, but in your opinion, this is one of the best, and so I'm really excited to be treated to this recording. It's about 20 minutes long, and then we'll come back. Carlin will have a chit chat about it.
Okay, that's looking forward to it.
All right, so Rick, when you're ready, hit play on Anne of Green Gables.
Chapter 2. Matthew Cuthbert is surprised. Matthew Cuthbert and the sorrel mare jogged comfortably over the 8 miles to Bright River. It was a pretty road, running along between snug farmsteads, with now and again a bit of balsamy firwood to drive through, or a hollow where wild plums hung out their filmy bloom. The air was sweet with the breath of many apple orchards, and the meadows sloped away in the distance to horizon mists of pearl and purple, while the little birds sang as if it were the one day of summer in all the year. Matthew enjoyed the drive after his own fashion, except during the moments when he met a woman and had to nod to them, for in Prince Edward Island you are supposed to nod to all and sundry you meet on the road, whether you know them or not. Matthew dreaded all women except Marilla and Mrs. Rachel. He had an uncomfortable feeling that the mysterious creatures were secretly laughing at him. He may have been quite right in thinking so, for he was an odd-looking personage, with an ungainly figure and long iron-gray hair that touched his stooping shoulders, and a full, soft brown beard which he had worn ever since he was 20. In fact, he had looked at 20 very much as he looked at 60, lacking a little of the grayness. When he reached Bright River, there was no sign of any train. He thought he was too early, so he tied his horse in the yard of the small Bright River Hotel and went over to the station house. The long platform was almost deserted, the only living creature in sight being a girl who was sitting on a pile of shingles at the extreme end. Matthew, barely noting that it was a girl, sidled past her as quickly as possible without looking at her. Had he looked, he could hardly have failed to notice the tense rigidity and expectation of her attitude and expression. She was sitting there waiting for something or somebody, and since sitting and waiting was the only thing to do just then, she sat and waited with all her might and main. Matthew encountered the station master locking up the ticket office preparatory to going home for supper, and asked him if the 5:30 train would soon be along. "The 5:30 train has been in and gone half an hour ago," answered that brisk official. "But there was a passenger dropped off for you, a little girl. She's sitting out there on the shingles. I asked her to go into the ladies' waiting room, but she informed me gravely that she preferred to stay outside. There was more scope for the imagination, she said. She's a case, I should say." "I'm not expecting a girl," said Matthew blankly. "It's a boy I've come for. He should be here. Mrs. Alexander Spencer was to bring him over from Nova Scotia for me." The station master whistled. "Guess there's some mistake," he said. "Mrs. Spencer came off the train with that girl and gave her into my charge. Said you and your sister were adopting her from an orphan asylum and you would be along for her presently. That's all I know about, and I haven't got any more orphans concealed hereabouts." "I don't understand," said Matthew helplessly, wishing that Marilla was at hand to cope with the situation. "Well, you'd better question the girl," said the station master carelessly. "I dare say she'll be able to explain. She's got a tongue of her own, that's certain. Maybe they were out of boys of the brand you wanted." He walked jauntily away, being hungry, and the unfortunate Matthew was left to do that which was harder for him than bearding a lion in its den, walk up to a girl, a strange girl, an orphan girl, and demand of her why she wasn't a boy. Matthew groaned in spirit as he turned about and shuffled gently down the platform towards her. She had been watching him ever since he had passed her, and she had her eyes on him now. Matthew was not looking at her, and would not have seen what she was really like if he had been, but an ordinary observer would have seen this. A child of about 11, garbed in a very short, very tight, very ugly dress of yellowish-gray wincey. She wore a faded brown sailor hat, and beneath the hat, extending down her back, were 2 braids of very thick, decidedly red hair. Her face was small, white, and thin, also much freckled. Her mouth was large, and so were her eyes, which looked green in some lights and moods and gray in others. So far, the ordinary observer. An extraordinary observer might have seen that the chin was very pointed and pronounced, that the big eyes were full of spirit and vivacity, that the mouth was sweet-lipped and expressive, that the forehead was broad and full. In short, our discerning, extraordinary observer might have concluded that no commonplace soul inhabited the body of this stray woman-child of whom shy Matthew Cuthbert was so ludicrously afraid. Matthew, however, was spared the ordeal of speaking first, for as soon as she concluded that he was coming to her, she stood up, grasping with one thin brown hand the handle of a shabby, old-fashioned carpet-bag. The other she held out to him. "I suppose that you are Mr. Matthew Cuthbert of Green Gables?" she said in a peculiarly clear, sweet voice. "I'm very glad to see you. I was beginning to be afraid you weren't coming for me, and I was imagining all the things that might have happened to prevent you. I had made up my mind that if you didn't come for me tonight, I'd go down the track to that big wild cherry tree at the bend and climb up into it to stay all night. I wouldn't be a bit afraid, and it would be lovely to sleep in a wild cherry tree all white with bloom in the moonshine, don't you think? You could imagine you were dwelling in marble halls, couldn't you? And I was quite sure you would come for me in the morning, if you didn't tonight." Matthew had taken the scrawny little hand awkwardly in his. Then and there he decided what to do. He could not tell this child with the glowing eyes that there had been a mistake. He would take her home and let Marilla do that. She couldn't be left at Bright River anyhow, no matter what mistake had been made, so all questions and explanations might as well be deferred until he was safely back at Green Gables. "I'm sorry I was late," he said shyly. "Come along. The horse is over in the yard. Give me your bag." "Oh, I can carry it," the child responded cheerfully. "It isn't heavy. I've got all my worldly goods in it, but it isn't heavy. And if it isn't carried in just a certain way, the handle pulls out, so I'd better keep it because I know the exact knack of it. It's an extremely old carpet bag. Oh, I'm very glad you've come, even if it would have been nice to sleep in a wild cherry tree. We've got to drive a long piece, haven't we? Mrs. Spencer said it was 8 miles. I'm glad because I love driving. Oh, it seems so wonderful that I'm going to live with you and belong to you. I've never belonged to anybody, not really. But the asylum was the worst. I've only been in it for 4 months, but that was enough. I don't suppose you ever were an orphan in an asylum, so you can't possibly understand what it is like. It's worse than anything you could imagine. Mrs. Spencer said it was wicked of me to talk like that, but I didn't mean to be wicked. It's so easy to be wicked without knowing it, isn't it? They were good, you know, the asylum people, but there's so little scope for the imagination in an asylum, only just in the other orphans. It was pretty interesting to imagine things about them, to imagine that perhaps the girl who sat next to you was really the daughter of a belted earl who had been stolen away from her parents in her infancy by a cruel nurse who died before she could confess. I used to lie awake at nights and imagine things like that, because I didn't have time in the day. I guess that's why I'm so thin. I am dreadful thin, ain't I? There isn't a pick on my bones. I do love to imagine I'm nice and plump with dimples in my elbows. With this, Matthew's companion stopped talking, partly because she was out of breath, and partly because they had reached the buggy. Not another word did she say until they had left the village and were driving down a steep little hill, the road part of which had been cut so deeply into the soft soil that the banks, fringed with blooming wild cherry trees and slim white birches, were several feet above their heads. The child put out her hand and broke off a branch of wild plum that brushed against the side of the buggy. "Isn't that beautiful? What did that tree leaning out from the bank, all white and lacy, make you think of?" she asked. Well, now, I don't know," said Matthew. "Why, a bride, of course. A bride all in white with a lovely misty veil. I've never seen one, but I can imagine what she would look like. I don't ever expect to be a bride myself. I'm so homely nobody would ever want to marry me, unless it might be a foreign missionary. I suppose a foreign missionary mightn't be very particular. But I do hope that someday I shall have a white dress. That is my highest ideal of earthly bliss. I just love pretty clothes. I've never had a pretty dress in my life that I can remember, but of course it's all the more to look forward to, isn't it? And then I can imagine that I'm dressed gorgeously. This morning, when I left the asylum, I felt so ashamed because I had to wear this horrible old wincey dress. All the orphans had to wear them, you know. A merchant in Hopeton last winter donated 300 yards of wincey to the asylum. Some people say it was because he couldn't sell it, but I'd rather believe that it was out of the kindness of his heart, wouldn't you? When we got on the train, I felt as if everybody must be looking at me and pitying me. But I just went to work and imagined that I had on the most beautiful pale blue silk dress, because when you are imagining, you might as well imagine something worthwhile, and a big hat all flowers and nodding plumes, and a gold watch, and kid gloves and boots. I felt cheered up right away, and I enjoyed my trip to the island with all my might. I wasn't a bit sick coming over in the boat.
Neither was Mrs. Spencer, although she generally is. She said she hadn't time to get sick, watching to see that I didn't fall overboard. She said she never saw the beat of me for prowling about. But if it kept her from being seasick, it's a mercy I did prowl, isn't it? And I wanted to see everything that was to be seen on that boat because I didn't know whether I'd ever have another opportunity. Oh, there are a lot more cherry trees all in bloom. This island is the bloomiest place. I just love it already, and I'm so glad I'm going to live here. I've always heard that Prince Edward Island was the prettiest place in the world, and I used to imagine that I was living here, but I never really expected I would. It's delightful when your imaginations come true, isn't it? But those red roads are so funny. When we got into the train at Charlottetown and the red roads began to flash past, I asked Mrs. Spencer what made them red, and she said she didn't know, and for pity's sake not to ask her any more questions. She said I must have asked her 1,000 questions already. I suppose I had too, but how are you going to find out about things if you don't ask questions? And what does make the roads red?
Well, no, I don't know, said Matthew.
Well, it is one of the things to find out sometime. Isn't it splendid to think of all the things there are to find out about? It just makes me feel glad to be alive. It's such an interesting world. It wouldn't be half so interesting if we know all about everything, would it? There'd be no scope for imagination then, would there? But am I talking too much? People are always telling me I do. Would you rather I didn't talk? If you say so, I'll stop. I can stop when I make my mind up to it, although it's difficult.
Matthew, much to his own surprise, was enjoying himself. Like most quiet folk, he liked talkative folk when they were willing to do the talking themselves and did not expect him to keep up his end of it. But he had never expected to enjoy the society of a little girl. Women were bad enough in all conscience, but little girls were worse. He detested the way they had of sidling past him timidly with sidewise glances, as if they expected him to gobble them up at a mouthful if they ventured to say a word. That was the Avonlea type of well-bred little girl. But this freckled witch was very different, and although he found it rather difficult for his slower intelligence to keep up with her brisk mental processes, he thought that he kind of liked her chatter. So he said, as shyly as usual, "Oh, you can talk as much as you like. I don't mind."
Oh, I'm so glad. I know you and I are going to get along together fine. It's such a relief to talk when one wants to and not be told that children should be seen and not heard. I've had that said to me 1,000,000 times if I have once, and people laugh at me because I use big words. But if you have big ideas, you have to use big words to express them, haven't you?
Well, now, that seems reasonable," said Matthew.
Mrs. Spencer said that my tongue must be hung in the middle, but it isn't. It's firmly fastened at one end. Mrs. Spencer said your place was named Green Gables. I asked her all about it. She said there were trees all around it. I was gladder than ever. I just love trees. And there weren't any at all about the asylum, only a few poor weeny teeny things out in front with little whitewashed cagey things about them. They looked like orphans themselves, those trees did. It used to make me want to cry to look at them. I used to say to them, "Oh, you poor little things. If you were out in a great big woods with other trees all around you, and little mosses and June bells growing over your roots, and a brook not far away, and birds singing in your branches, you could grow, couldn't you? But you can't where you are. I know just exactly how you feel, little trees." I felt sorry to leave them behind this morning. You do get so attached to things like that, don't you? Is there a brook anywhere near Green Gables? I forgot to ask Mrs. Spencer that.
"Well, now, yes, there's one right below the house."
Fancy! It's always been one of my dreams to live near a brook. I never expected I would, though. Dreams don't often come true, do they? Wouldn't it be nice if they did? But just now I feel pretty nearly perfectly happy. I can't feel exactly perfectly happy because, well, what color would you call this?
She twitched one of her long glossy braids over her thin shoulder and held it up before Matthew's eyes. Matthew was not used to deciding on the tints of ladies' tresses, but in this case there couldn't be much doubt. It's red, ain't it?" he said. The girl let the braid drop back with a sigh that seemed to come from her very toes and to exhale forth all the sorrows of the ages.
Yes, It's red, she said resignedly. Now you see why I can't be perfectly happy. Nobody could who has red hair. I don't mind the other things so much, the freckles and the green eyes and my skinniness. I can imagine them away. I can imagine that I have a beautiful rose leaf complexion and lovely starry violet eyes, but I cannot imagine that red hair away. I do my best. I think to myself, now my hair is a glorious black, black as the raven's wing. But all the time I know it is just plain red, and it breaks my heart. It will be my lifelong sorrow. I read of a girl once in a novel who had a lifelong sorrow, but it wasn't red hair. Her hair was pure gold rippling back from her alabaster brow. What is an alabaster brow? I never could find out. Can you tell me?
Well, now, I'm afraid I can't, said Matthew, who was getting a little dizzy. He felt as he had once felt in his rash youth when another boy had enticed him on the merry-go-round at a picnic.
Well, whatever it is, it must have been something nice because she was divinely beautiful. Have you ever imagined what it must feel like to be divinely beautiful?
Well, now, no, I haven't, confessed Matthew ingenuously.
I have, often. Which would you rather be if you had the choice? Divinely beautiful, or dazzlingly clever, or angelically good?
Well, now, I don't know exactly.
Neither do I. I can never decide. But it doesn't make much real difference, for it isn't likely I'll ever be either. It's certain I'll never be angelically good. Mrs. Spencer says, "Oh, Mr. Cuthbert! Oh, Mr. Cuthbert! Oh, Mr. Cuthbert!"
That was not what Mrs. Spencer had said. Neither had the child tumbled out of the buggy, nor had Matthew done anything astonishing. They had simply rounded a curve in the road and found themselves in the avenue. The avenue, so called by the Newbridge people, was a stretch of road 400 or 500 yards long, completely arched over with huge, wide-spreading apple trees planted years ago by an eccentric old farmer. Overhead was one long canopy of snowy, fragrant bloom. Below the boughs, the air was full of a purple twilight, and far ahead, a glimpse of painted sunset sky shone like a great rose window at the end of a cathedral aisle. Its beauty seemed to strike the child dumb. She leaned back in the buggy, her thin hands clasped before her, her face lifted rapturously to the white splendor above. Even when they had passed out and were driving down the long slope to Newbridge, she never moved or spoke. Still with rapt face, she gazed afar into the sunset west, with eyes that saw visions trooping splendidly across that glowing background. Through Newbridge, a bustling little village where dogs barked at them and small boys hooted and curious faces peered from the windows, they drove, still in silence. When 3 more miles had dropped away behind them, the child had not spoken. She could keep silence, it was evident, as energetically as she could talk. "I guess you're feeling pretty tired and hungry," Matthew ventured to say at last, accounting for her long visitation of dumbness with the only reason he could think of. "But we haven't very far to go now, only another mile." She came out of her reverie with a deep sigh and looked at him with the dreamy gaze of a soul that had been wandering afar, star-led. "Oh, Mr. Cuthbert," she whispered, "that place we came through, that white place, what was it?" "Well, now, you must mean the avenue," said Matthew after a few moments' profound reflection. "It's a kind of pretty place." "Pretty? Oh, pretty doesn't seem the right word to use, nor beautiful either. They don't go far enough. Oh, it was wonderful, wonderful. It's the first thing I ever saw that couldn't be improved upon by imagination. It just satisfies me. Here," she put one hand on her breast. "It made a queer, funny ache, and yet it was a pleasant ache. Did you ever have an ache like that, Mr. Cuthbert?"
Okay. That
So-
was the sample of Anne of Green Gables.
Yes, Colleen Winton.
Colleen Winton.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. I mean, it's a lovely dynamic read with all the different voices. They're very clear which character's which, right? What's the relationship between you and Colleen? Is she a friend, as you say you started with your friends, or how did that
Uh,
relationship start?
yeah, well, I knew Colleen through other friends and through people like Dave Adams and a lot of these people. Um, Colleen's a friend now. Would I
Hmm.
say that she was a friend there? She was more of an acquaintance before we
Hmm.
started recording audiobooks, but I'd always really admired her acting and her work. And, we were very friendly when we met. And then after I started recording audiobooks, I started reaching out to local actors because I saw audiobooks as wonderful work for actors. And I think that the actors I know who get involved in audiobooks, not all of them, but 98% of actors really enjoy recording audiobooks. It's one of the few opportunities they get where it's all them and their
Yeah.
creation. Multicast changes that a little bit, but and multicasts are becoming more popular, but I don't think that the single narrator reading a story like we just heard is ever going to go out of fashion
Hmm.
because it allows you to just go away with your imagination. Like I love that piece that we just played because of the dynamic quality of Colleen's voice, the way she brings Anne alive. Um, and you can really hear that breathless quality of Anne as a little girl. Um, so Yeah, so Colleen and I we go back far, and we're definitely closer friends now than we were before. But that's the other wonderful thing about audiobooks for me personally. It's allowed me to work with a lot of people who I liked and admired and get to know them even better.
How long does it take to assemble an audiobook like this one?
Well, it depends. So first we start off with the recording. Um, Generally, you're looking at least 2 hours, possibly 3 hours in the booth for every finished hour of audio. So, say a book is 10 hours long, that's about 20 to 30 hours of recording, depending on the narrator and the difficulty of the text. Then that audiobook has to be taken and listened to very carefully, reading along with the text. There are different schools of thought here. There's a tendency today to make audiobooks 100% match the text, but that wasn't always the case,
Right.
especially before digital technology, when to re record every little mistake would be very costly
Yeah.
because with the origins of sound would have been on tape, and be like film.
Hmm.
um, so nowadays we tend to try and get books 100% the same as the text, but I tend to be a little bit more flexible with that because there's a lot of times when we say although, actually that's not a good example, but around, about.
Hmm.
So you're reading a page and you say around, but the actual word is about. Does that really need to be changed? It hasn't changed the meaning,
It
right?
hasn't
So
changed the intent. Yeah.
yeah, so that's kind of a producer publisher decision. Um, but like I say, the tendency these days is to get it 100% correct. I don't necessarily always follow that because I'm more interested in it being very listenable. And if somebody's just done a really great take and that one little word doesn't really change the meaning, often we're going to leave that and decide later if we're going to do pickup. Anyway, so we proof it very carefully. We're identifying anytime there's any little noise, like say I move around like this, you can hear how much
Mhm.
noise that makes, or rubbing the leg, right? The very first book I ever recorded, I didn't know what I was doing. And I had a really great actor in the studio. And that entire time, he was nervously rubbing his leg because he'd never recorded an audiobook before. And I just ignored that. I thought, oh, no worries. And we had to throw out the entire recording because I
Yeah.
should have been telling him, you can't rub your leg like that. But I was ignorant. I didn't know what I was doing yet.
So you're listening
Uh,
when people are doing the recordings.
yes,
Yeah.
we generally have an engineer. Now, that's not always the case. A lot of audiobooks today are recorded by an actor in a little booth like this in their home, and they work by themselves.
Mhm.
Um, but a lot of books are still recorded with an engineer. And we have an engineer station right outside of this booth. And as I mentioned in our new location, we're actually going to use one of the iOS booths as an engineer station. And the reason for that is that the quieter that engineer station is, the better the quality of our initial recording. If you've got the engineers sitting there and they're listening along, they're reading along with the text, they're stopping the actor if the actor makes a mistake and they don't catch it themselves, or say maybe the actor reads something and it doesn't quite sound right, or they've mumbled, or they've moved and there's a noise, or there's a stomach noise, or a loud mouth noise. I mean, there's so many different things you're
Yeah.
listening for as the engineer. Um, so in this case, where we are, it's a fairly quiet room that the engineer's in, but it's not silent. So sometimes you might hear something and you're not sure, is it on my recording that I'm listening to and monitoring, or was that an outside noise? So the quieter you can have the engineer station, in my mind, the better that our end product can be. Because now you know if you've heard anything, it's not the neighbors, it's not
Right.
some outside noise, it's definitely in the studio. And I have lost train of. I'm terrible. I will go off and
No, it's all good. It's
talk
all
and talk.
good.
Yeah. So we have the engineer and the person inside, and then after that, after the recording, we have that proofer. Then the actor comes back in, and we record all of the pickups. And there's always pickups. It's really rare that you can record. Oh, I see somebody has a hand up. It's really rare that you can record and not have some sort of pickups. And then after that, they're cut into the audio. And then there's a whole mastering process, which is designed to make that. So, say you have 10 hours of audio, you need to make that audio level and sound the same across that. And there's little subtle changes in the audio, even from day to day. A studio can sound a little bit different. Or we need to watch for things like the position to the mic. I'm moving around. I'm not paying any attention to that. If I was narrating, I'd be staying as still as I can. And I would also be paying attention to where I am vis a vis the mic and keeping that as consistent as possible. And then the mastering is going to fix the rest of that because you're trying to make that 10 hours of audio all sound like it was recorded on the very same day at the
Yeah.
same time.
We'll take a hand from Rita. We weren't going to do hands in between, and we were going to wait for the Q&A. But Rita, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Sorry, I really wanted to ask you, why did you call your company Post Hypnotic Press?
That is a very good question, and one I still ask myself because with experience, I think I should have called it something like Audiobooks Are Us. There were a lot of things going on. I mentioned that every time I went to go in a certain direction, I'd find myself 180 degrees from where I was going. So Post Hypnotic Press, to me, I was looking for a name that was catchy, that was different, and that was sort of expressing this idea of me leaving behind, like being in a trance and really making conscious decisions and going forward. I was 50 when I started this company. I'm 61 now. And it was a big change for me. I had always wanted to have my own business. I was just fortunate that things came together finally, that I had the experience I needed. I had the opportunity. We were financially, like I supported this business myself and built it without any financial help. So Post Hypnotic Press was sort of me leaving behind a kind of hypnotic trance and going forward with this press. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
it only needs to make sense to you. It makes sense to me, but it only needs to make sense to you, Carlyn, because it's your company. Yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of what it was. But yeah. And mainly, too, I was looking for something that was catchy but very different.
Yeah. So let's transition into our next listen, our next read, our next listen. What have you got next on the docket for us, or do you need me to remind you what we've got next?
We're doing Inside Animal Hearts and Minds and When Animals Rescue, right?
Yeah. So the first one is When Animals Rescue. Yeah. What can you tell us about the introduction to this book?
Okay, so these two books, they're sort of together. They were actually companion books published by, written by Belinda Riccio, who has an award-winning author, and the award is for her ability to translate science for people to understand it. And these books that we produced with her, Inside Animal Hearts and Minds and When Animals Rescue, they're both about animals. The first one is animal sentience and the science of animal sentience that has been developed over the last 40 years. So she goes chapter by chapter taking different animals and looking at the research that shows that animals are a lot more, especially mammals, are sentient little beings. And the reason that I love these books is because of their ability to change people's hearts and minds about animals, to try and educate them and get them to have empathy for animals,
Mhm.
and see how related we are to animals. So the first one talks about the science of sentience. The second one is all sorts of true stories about empathy. And the second one actually came along because the first book was so popular, she was asked to do another one. And this was another area that she was interested in, was the many, many examples of animals, not just showing empathy to humans, but showing empathy and rescuing other species. Um, and it just shows how similar they are to humans and how we're not really different. We're not even that much smarter, honestly. So that's what I was attracted to those two books. Hayden Panettiere, who was with on Heroes. Don't know if you guys would know that. That was a really popular show years ago.
I
The last thing
remember.
she did on TV was Nashville. She was recently in a Scream movie. We approached her because I knew that she was a big animal advocate, and I really liked her voice. This is the first thing and only thing audiobooks that she's narrated, and her goal was to make these books engaging and hold the attention of her daughter, who was about 4 or 5 years old at the time we were recording. And she really nails it. They are entertaining for adults to listen to, but you can listen to them with a young child. And we've had reviewers saying how their kids have been really engaged by these books. So that's what we really wanted. We wanted books that were going to engage people to think about animals.
I love it. I got again a lot of animal lovers in this space tonight too, and we do have some cover art that's going to be up too. Again, another like the book cover kind of idea. Rick's going to bring that image up, and maybe Carlyn, you can do a quick description of this for us.
Okay, so in the top part of the screen, you see the two covers. On the left is Inside Animal Hearts and Minds. The cover is an elephant, and he's got a little parrot on his trunk. And you'll see there's a medallion on there. Both of these books were nominated for Voice Arts Awards. And the other book on the top left, When Animals Rescue, was the winner for that. And we could only have one because they were both in the same category. So that there's a medallion on there, and we see, I think that is a humpback whale under the water, and you could just see in the top left a little tiny human being swimming there under the water with the whale. So below that, on the left side, is a picture of Hayden Panettiere, and she's standing with an elephant. She's cuddled up to it. And on the right is a picture of the author, Belinda Riccio.
Awesome. So I do have us listening to When Animals Rescue first.
That's great.
Right. So this is about a 10-minute clip, and then we'll come back and set up the second book. So Rick, when you're ready, please hit play on When Animals Rescue.
Chapter 3 Gorilla. For the greater good. The older male was the first to arrive at the primitive but deadly snare, a device designed to trap an animal in a rope noose. After a few seconds, a young male and female emerged from the shadows of the underbrush. They joined him at the snare, appeared to consider the situation for a few moments, and then began taking it apart like seasoned pros. They worked quickly and efficiently without getting caught in the trap themselves. They pulled back the trigger branch and snapped it in half, releasing the tension of the rope noose and rendering the snare inoperable. Anyone hearing the story would assume the individuals destroying the snare were human, possibly even specially trained soldiers. But they were not. They were wild gorillas in Rwanda who had somehow learned to dismantle poaching snares. The snares, set to catch prey used as bushmeat, are created by making a noose with rope and attaching it to a branch that is pulled downward toward the ground, which creates tension on the rope. The noose is then anchored to the ground with a rock or stick and camouflaged with leaves and branches. When an animal steps on or bumps into the anchoring stick or stone, the branch snaps upward, catching him in the noose. Although the hunters who set the traps claim to have no interest in gorillas, they sometimes catch gorillas nonetheless. Young gorillas can die in the snares, and older gorillas can lose a limb. Researchers from the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund's Karasoke Research Center witnessed the scene described above. They were hiking in Volcanoes National Park in Rwanda when they saw the 4-year-old gorillas dismantling the snare. But that was simply the start of the gorillas' workday. After they finished taking apart the first snare, the same 2 young gorillas moved on to another snare where a 3rd juvenile joined them. The trio then dismantled the second snare, working so deftly that it seemed likely that they had done this work before. It turns out that the day the researchers had witnessed the juvenile gorillas destroying the snares was only a few days after a very young gorilla had been caught in one. The tiny youngster broke his shoulder, presumably while trying to escape, and developed infections that ended his life. Researchers wondered if there might be a connection between the harm the snares had caused the gorillas and their snare dismantling behavior. Researchers had also previously witnessed older gorillas removing snare wire that was wrapped around the arms of younger gorillas who had escaped from snares, so it seemed likely that the gorillas understood the snares were a threat. Although this wasn't the first time researchers had seen gorillas destroying poaching snares, it was the first time they had seen such young gorillas doing it, which raised the possibility that the gorillas were teaching their young how to take apart the snares. Extraordinary as it is that gorillas might be passing on this kind of knowledge to their young, even more fascinating is what it suggests about gorilla empathy. The gorillas who destroyed the snares knew where the traps were, so they didn't need to dismantle them to protect themselves. They simply could have avoided them. By dismantling the snares, they appear to be protecting other gorillas, which allows for the possibility that they were experiencing and acting on concern for others. Remarkably, they might be practicing a kind of social welfare. Nurturing Nature, Binti Jua. Primatologist Greg Dimitros knows how important mothering is to young animals, especially to females. If a female infant isn't properly mothered, she often doesn't know how to nurture her own offspring later in life. Lulu, a zoo-born gorilla, had not been taught mothering skills by her own mother, so it wasn't too surprising when Lulu eventually gave birth to a daughter and then neglected her. Dimitros was determined that Lulu's daughter, named Binti Jua, which means daughter of sunlight in Swahili, would not repeat this cycle of neglect. So he and other zoo staff decided to take on the job of raising Binti Jua with the express intent of teaching her mothering skills. They hoped, with their nurturing and training, that if she one day had her own offspring, she would know what to do. Dimitros and the zoo staff bottle-fed Binti Jua and socialized her by exposing her to other gorillas. They coaxed Binti Jua to learn nurturing skills using a stuffed animal as a surrogate baby. They taught her how to cradle the stuffed toy and how to babysit it, which is a part of maternal care known as retrieval. To teach this retrieval skill, the zoo staff moved the stuffed toy around, away from Binti Jua, teaching her to retrieve the toy, return it to her area, and keep her baby within arm's reach. Little did Dimitros know that Binti Jua would one day use her retrieval skills to rescue a human child. But that is exactly what happened in August 1996, when a 3-year-old boy crawled over a fence surrounding Chicago's Brookfield Zoo's gorilla pen and fell 24 feet onto the concrete floor of the gorilla enclosure that housed Binti Jua and 6 other gorillas. At the time, Binti Jua was 8 years old and had a 17-month-old baby of her own, Kula. According to zoo staff members and visitors, as soon as Binti Jua noticed the child, she quickly approached him. with Kula riding on her back. She picked up the injured boy and cradled him in her arms, keeping him away from the other gorillas. She then carried him through the enclosure to the door used by the zookeepers. There, she carefully placed the motionless child on the floor where the zoo staff were able to retrieve him. The boy was rushed to the hospital where he was treated for a broken hand and facial cuts. After 4 days at the hospital, he made a full recovery. The story and a video of the incident spread throughout the world and turned Binti Jua into an international heroine. Binti Jua's behavior has been widely interpreted as evidence of gorilla empathy. But there are skeptics who claim that her nurturing behavior that day was the result of conditioning, the retrieval behavior taught to her by zoo staff, rather than true empathy. But this doesn't seem like a fair dismissal, given that even humans respond empathetically to those in need through a combination of innate tendency and learned behaviors. When a human female is taught how to care for a baby, by caring for younger siblings or babysitting for other families, and later becomes a mother herself, it is unlikely anyone would dismiss her mothering behavior as mere conditioning. It is more likely that good parenting skills, whether demonstrated by a human, gorilla, or other animal, result from a combination of learned behaviors and some sort of innate empathy. Jambo. Binti Jua isn't the only gorilla who has had to contend with a child falling into her enclosure. In August 1986, while visiting England's Jersey Zoo, 5-year-old Levin Merritt fell into the gorilla exhibit. The 12-foot fall knocked Levin unconscious and fractured his skull. Gorillas began moving toward the injured boy when one of them, a male named Jambo, behaved in a way that forever changed Levin's life. Jambo stood guard over Levin, positioning himself between the boy and other gorillas in what animal behaviorists interpreted as a protective gesture. Jambo even gently stroked Levin's back. When Levin regained consciousness and started to cry, Jambo and the other gorillas retreated, at which point a zookeeper and paramedic removed Levin from the enclosure. Recorded on video, the incident was reported on major news channels around the world and helped to shift public perception about gorillas. Needless to say, the experience also changed Levin Merritt. Now an adult, with a family of his own, Levin still expresses gratitude to Jambo for his gentle and protective nature. Frown. Sad. Trouble. Coco was a Western lowland gorilla best known for her ability to communicate in sign language. She knew more than 1,000 words in American Sign Language and understood roughly 2,000 words of spoken English. Coco's ability to communicate with humans enabled us to have a glimpse of a gorilla's inner life. Because she could sign, we learned that Coco was self-aware. When asked what she saw when looking at a mirror, Coco signed, "Me." And when asked who she was, she answered, "Coco," and described herself as a fine animal gorilla. We also learned that Coco had a sense of humor. She chuckled at absurdities, such as when someone pretended to feed candy to a toy alligator. She laughed at incongruities, such as when she tied her trainer's shoelaces together and signed, "Chase." And she wryly called people, and other gorillas, names such as toilet or devil when she was upset with them or just didn't like them. But perhaps most important, we learned that Coco had emotions similar to those of humans. She developed friendships, expressed desires such as wanting to have a baby, and cared for a kitten. Unfortunately, the kitten, whom Coco named Allball, was hit by a car and died. Coco appeared to grieve for her feline companion, signing cry, frown, sad, and trouble when she learned of Allball's death. She also grieved after learning of the death of actor Robin Williams, whom she had met and befriended when he visited her. Coco didn't only express sadness after experiencing her own losses, but also seemed to relate to other people's emotions. Whenever Coco watched the film Tea with Mussolini, she would turn away during an especially sad part of the story about a boy who lost his mother, and sign, frown, sad, trouble, and mother, while her face contorted into expressions her caregivers had learned to associate with sadness. Coco was a remarkable ape who helped to change the public's perception of gorillas, especially their capacity for communication and empathy.
Okay, I'm going to bring Carlyn back. That was a really lovely listen. I remember Coco, and I remember the stories of these young kids that had fallen into animal enclosures. So it's really interesting to listen to all of this stuff sort of in one place, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also, I mean, I remember Coco. I've been a fan of Coco since the 80s when she
Mm-hmm.
was first working with her. Um, so, yeah, it is. It's nice to hear those. Now, um, this was from When Animals Rescue,
Yes.
the empathy. Okay, because I'm getting confused with the two books because I thought that they were organized like the first book, The Inside Animal Hearts and Minds, is organized around the animals and different learning skills. So that's what we'll hear next, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, so I guess she's organized the empathy around animals. That's what I'm forgetting. But yeah, it's a wonderful look at our closest relatives, our close cousins, really,
Mm-hmm.
and our close cousins are in dire shape. They're, you know, we're driving everything to extinction. So, again, that's sort of my passion for a lot of these books. Every book we publish, I really believe in, and there's a reason why I'm putting it out there.
Yeah. There's a lot really to unpack there when you think about. I mean, if you could sit down and talk to the gorillas about what's happening with devastation of the rainforests, and right,
Yeah,
we could really learn a lot of things, but
yeah.
sadly,
So
that kind of work's not happening, as far as I know,
yeah.
anyways. Yeah.
There are efforts, and you know there are efforts everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Efforts like this little one, but there are efforts on the ground. You know, they're trying to protect um, the habitat that they have left,
Mm-hmm.
and but I think that at least what I've read, some people feel that the best hope for some of our primate relatives is going to be captivity and the animals that are in captivity continuing. I'm a really big fan. Have you heard of Franz de Waal? Do you know
Oh, but
him?
I'm sure you're going to tell me all about it.
I would love to publish his books in audio, but unfortunately, that's not me. He's mentioned often in Ricio's books as well. He's a primate in a
Ah,
researcher, and
yeah.
he's worked with primates for the last 30 years or so. And his books are really wonderful.
Mm.
If you're interested in primatology, if you're interested in that, Franz de Waal, Our Inner Ape was, I think, the first book I listened to by him. Wonderful book. He's got a book about that meditates on our spiritual side because there's
Mm-hmm.
evidence that primates too exhibit what we would call spiritual behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So very interesting author. But anyway, I don't publish him, so Bill.
Well,
But you could find his books in audio, and they're brilliant.
I appreciate the recommendation, even if you're not the publisher, but we can circle back to books that you've published.
Yeah,
Because the next one we're gonna listen to is also, as you reference, like a pairing, a partner with this series,
that's
kind
right.
of.
Yeah,
Inside Hearts and Minds,
yeah. Inside Animal Hearts and
Animal
Minds.
Hearts and Minds. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like I said earlier, this is a book that strives to take the last 40, 50 years of science about animal sentience, how they think, how they feel, and um, basically summarize it. It's but it's very entertaining, very informative, and very easy to listen to, in my opinion.
Okay, well, I'm excited to have a listen to this one as well. Also, narrated by Hayden Panettiere, correct?
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Well, friends, sit back and let's have a listen to Inside Animal Hearts and Minds. Rick, when you're ready, hit play.
Chapter 2: A Generous Nature, Reciprocity and Cooperation. Gift-giving crows. Derek was a crow who rarely showed up without a gift, and Amanda was a wildlife rehabilitator who had done him a favor. Like other wildlife rehabilitators, Amanda cares for sick, injured, and orphaned wild animals with the goal of releasing them back into their natural habitats when they are ready. After being released, rehabilitated animals will sometimes linger in the neighborhood and return to visit the people who helped them. Every once in a while, these animals show up bearing gifts. This is what happened to Amanda after she helped Derek recover from a wing injury. After receiving the injured crow, Amanda named him Derek. He quickly bonded with her entire family, including her black lab Jake. At times when Amanda was away from home, Derek would show as much excitement and pleasure at her return as any dog would. He vocalized softly and rubbed his head against her hand, seemingly delighted to be back in her company. Derek also had a thing for Jake. He loved being near him and would gently peck at his paws and try to preen his fur. Luckily, Jake welcomed Derek's affection. In fact, they had a favorite game in which Derek held onto Jake's collar and rode him like a horse as Jake trotted around the yard. Derek was released back into the wild once his wing healed. But having developed a fondness for his human family, he loitered in the local woods for a few months, staying close enough to call out to them and visit. Amanda often ate breakfast on her terrace, and one morning, when she ran inside to answer the phone, Derek swooped down from a nearby tree and stole the last bite of her croissant. 5 minutes later, he reappeared and presented a leaf to her. During the next few weeks, Derek appeared every morning at breakfast time bearing gifts: leaves, twigs, acorns, colorful bits of plastic, even a key Amanda had lost a long time ago, and an occasional dead beetle. Amanda reciprocated by leaving him a bite of her breakfast. Sometimes, Derek showed up in the afternoon when food wasn't present and simply left a gift on the table. Derek's behavior isn't especially unusual. Stories, both ancient and modern, recount crows' propensity for giving gifts, especially in response to food. In 2015, one such story went viral on the internet. Gabby Mann, an 8-year-old girl from Seattle, would sometimes accidentally drop food while waiting for the school bus. When the crows nearby noticed, they descended to score a free snack. Gabby was charmed, and she started deliberately feeding them with bits of her school lunch. Before long, Gabby and her family started feeding crows at home by filling an old bird bath with peanuts. Whenever the crows ate them all, one would return with a gift and leave it in the bird bath. Over time, these gifts included rusty metal, sea glass, old buttons, beads, and other tokens of appreciation. Once, a crow even returned with the missing lens cap from Gabby's mother's camera. In other accounts, however, it seems like crows express gratitude for acts of kindness that have nothing to do with food. In John Marsliff and Tony Angel's book, Gifts of the Crow, the authors describe how an ornithologist discovered and freed an injured crow who was stuck upside down in a fence. After a few minutes of recovery, the crow was able to fly away. But that was not the end of the story. From time to time, the crow returned, leaving gifts at the exact spot on the fence where he'd been rescued. Crows aren't the only animals that give gifts. Scientists have observed similar behaviors between members of a variety of insect, spider, fish, bird, and mammal species. Most often, gifting occurs between mates or prospective mates. These are called nuptial gifts, which range from food to inedible tokens, such as the pebbles that male Gen 2 penguins present to females as part of their courtship ritual. Less often, animals will give gifts to other members of their group, friends perhaps, and occasionally, like the crows that befriended Gabby and Amanda, they will even present a gift to a member of another species. For example, there are numerous reports of dolphins presenting gifts of eel, squid, octopus, and fish to humans. And many people who share their homes with domestic cats tell stories about the dead rodents, birds, snakes, and other gifts left for them by their feline family member. Reciprocity, the practice of exchanging resources or favors with others for mutual benefit, is an evolutionary adaptation that increases an individual's chances for survival, especially in social species. When animals reciprocate positive actions, they strengthen the bonds of their relationships, just as humans do when lending a helping hand, exchanging gifts, or inviting friends to share a meal. It turns out that gift-giving isn't just a human cultural tradition, but something deeper and more prevalent, an ancient gesture of reciprocity that connects us with the larger fabric of nature. A leopard seal's approval. Animals give gifts even in the remotest regions of Earth. In Antarctica, for example, a leopard seal presented unexpected gifts to a polar photographer. Paul Nicklin was swimming with leopard seals while filming them, and many of his fellow scientists worried that the seals would attack Nicklin. That didn't turn out to be the case. In fact, one large female leopard seal, with a head bigger than a grizzly bear's, seemed especially taken with Nicklin and began trying to feed him. She brought him penguin after penguin, a favorite meal for leopard seals. At first, she brought him live penguins, which immediately swam away when Nicklin didn't respond like a leopard seal by eating them. Eventually, she changed her strategy. She caught a penguin, tired him out, and then presented him to Nicklin. When Nicklin again didn't respond, she decided to make it really easy by bringing him dead penguins. Of course, Nicklin didn't accept those either. At this point, the leopard seal backed off. She floated in the water for a few minutes, looking at Nicklin as if she couldn't believe he had refused her offerings. Finally, she grabbed a penguin and flipped him onto Nicklin's head in an apparent attempt to force-feed the photographer. That strategy failed too. Although Nicklin didn't respond in the way the leopard seal seemed to want him to, he and the seal parted amicably. Nicklin now has the distinction of being the first human known to have received gifts from a leopard seal. Pulling together. So much of what humans have accomplished as a species has been the result of cooperation. Everything from astrophysics to zoology has depended on people working together and sharing discoveries and resources. Until recently, we thought of cooperation as one of the qualities that distinguishes humans from other animals. But many scientists now believe that cooperation and sharing evolved in other animals for the same reason they evolved in humans, to help ensure that the species is successful. It simply makes sense, from an evolutionary perspective, for members of a certain species to share and cooperate if they want to survive and thrive. Primatologist Frans de Waal and his colleagues conducted experiments to explore cooperation in capuchin monkeys, teaching them to reach cups of food on a tray by pulling on a spring-loaded bar attached to the tray. The tray was too heavy for just one monkey to move on its own, so there was an incentive to work together. During one of the experiments, two females, Bias and Sammy, worked together to pull the tray within reach. But Sammy, in a rush to get her food cup, released the bar and the tray bounced out of reach before Bias could get her cup. Bias screamed with apparent indignation while Sammy enjoyed her food. But Sammy soon gave in and helped Bias pull the tray back up so she could get her food too. Sammy didn't need to help Bias. There was nothing in it for her as she had already retrieved her own food. When she stopped eating to help Bias, it likely meant one thing. she was responding to Bias's agitation. At least that was DeWall's hypothesis. He believes Sammy felt that she owed it to Bias to help her retrieve her cup of food because Bias had already helped her get her own cup. This experiment suggests that some social species, like capuchin monkeys, remember and appreciate favors the same way humans do, and they feel resentful when others don't pay back their favors. On the flip side, many species also appear to feel indebted when they are the recipients of favors, and return the favor when given a chance. In a similar experiment undertaken by DeWall, psychologist Joshua Plotnick and other researchers, pairs of Asian elephants were taught to simultaneously pull both ends of a rope to move a platform containing food within their reach. If only one end of the rope was pulled, the rope slipped out and the platform wouldn't move. The elephants, each in their own separate fenced lane, quickly learned to coordinate their effort to pull the rope together, move the platform, and reach the food. They even showed an understanding that there wasn't any point in pulling until their partner was in position and ready to work together. Even in the wild, the behaviors of both elephants and primates provide evidence that, like humans, some animals exchange favors based on long-term social ties rather than on what advantage they can gain in the moment. For example, elephants often demonstrate cooperative behavior, especially when it comes to helping out with parenting or tending to an individual in distress. Primates often cooperate too, even without any immediate reward in sight. A chimp will sometimes treat a friend to a long grooming session that isn't immediately reciprocated, but later, the friend she groomed will be likely to remember her if she has food to share. For certain species of animals, including humans, generosity and cooperation seem to be more about remembering who is good to you over time, not just in the last 5 minutes, and being generally good to them in response, even if it means waiting before it's your turn to get your back scratched. Cooperating for the catch. In the coastal city of Laguna in southern Brazil, people and bottlenose dolphins have engaged in cooperative fishing together for generations, at least for 120 years, based on the historical evidence of a 19th century letter that references the practice. The fishermen fish with nets, but due to the murkiness of the water, they can't determine the best locations to cast their nets. So, they partner with bottlenose dolphins. The fishermen wade into the water and wait for their partners to show up. Some days none show up, other days only uncooperative dolphins appear, but on good days, the helpful dolphins show up, ready to fish together. The fishermen insist that it's barely worth fishing if their friends aren't around to help. Soon after arriving, the dolphins swim toward the fishermen, herding shoals of mullet into their nets. At the right moment, the dolphins signal the fishermen by performing a particular dive that it's time to cast their nets. The fishermen claim that the direction and thrust of the dolphins' dives will tell them about the size of the school and the direction it's traveling in, which help them to aim the nets. Over the years, the local fishermen have given the dolphins names and even have favorite dolphins they prefer as fishing partners. As a result of their teamwork, the fishermen haul in nets full of fish. As for the dolphins, they get an easy meal out of it. Scientists believe that the net causes the fish to panic, which breaks up the school, leaving some fish on their own, and solo fish are much easier for dolphins to catch.
Solo fish are much easier for dolphins to catch. That is very true. Okay, so we've seen some empathy towards humans from animals, animals working with humans, animals working with each other. This idea of collaboration, right?
Yeah. Well, we think of collaboration when we think of our dogs, say, right? I mean,
Yeah.
long tradition there. But or horses. So we have lots of experience with collaboration, but we
Mhm.
don't necessarily think of it with animals like a dolphin or
Mhm.
crows, you know?
Do you know, it reminds me of, I don't know if you ever saw the documentary called My Octopus Teacher.
No, but I want to see that. I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah, it is audio described for friends who want to watch it. But it is really this like relationship between an octopus and a diver, which is really quite interesting
Yeah.
to watch, that nobody would ever think about is a thing,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Octopuses apparently are incredibly smart.
Oh, absolutely, they
Yeah,
are.
they're apparently all brain. Like their
Mm-hmm.
whole body is brain.
Mm-hmm.
They're quite fascinating. I don't know a lot about them. I'd like to learn more.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
It's a good it's just a good reminder, I think, that I humans are arrogant enough often to think that we're the only species on the planet that matters, right?
Hmm.
Because we're the thinking, emotional species.
That's right.
If you don't look hard enough, you're gonna miss some really wonderful things.
That's right. And that's what I liked about these books. We think of
Yeah.
ourselves as the only ones with language
Yeah.
or all these other abilities. And that's what the Inside Animal Hearts and Minds, I think I said it was organized by animals, but that one's actually organized by uh, things that we think of as uniquely human,
Yeah.
language skills, counting, laughter,
Hmm.
humor, right? Animals have senses of humor. In fact, apparently rats love to be tickled. That was one of the things I learned in this book. They love to be tickled, and they will actually like tickling more than a food reward in research.
You know who else likes to be tickled? It's not me, I
Who?
promise. I learned this on another documentary about pigs.
Oh, yeah.
Pigs. There's something called forking, and you take literally a kitchen fork and you rub it on the back of a pig, and they just like they'll do whatever you want them to do.
Wow.
Yeah,
Well,
it
and
just
there's a
it zens them right
story
out.
that is so interesting. Pigs are very, again, another really smart
Very smart
animal.
animals.
There
Yeah.
was a story in one of these books about a woman who had a pot-bellied pig, and it had become quite large by this point, so it
Mm-hmm.
had to squeeze through the gate. Anyway, she had a stroke, and there was nobody around to help her but her pig, and the pig had to squeeze through this gate. It was scraping its sides, and it was running out into the street, into the traffic, trying to get attention, and running back in to check on its owner, and running back out, and it would actually go. It went into the middle of traffic and played dead until finally somebody got out of the car, and by this time the pig had a lot of scrapes on it, so there
To
was
say it's
blood.
quite a
So
risk.
yeah, so the guy thought the pig was hurt, and he came and he said, "Hey, lady, your pig is hurt." And she yelled from inside, "I'm hurt," you know.
Mhm.
And so they got an ambulance for her, but she'd actually was having a stroke or a heart attack or something, and this
Mhm.
pig saved her life. And there are other stories like that in here too. But yeah, we don't give. We have a, what's the word I'm looking for? A prejudice. A chauvinistic attitude about
Mhm.
human ability. And even when I was a kid, I remember back in high school, I was interested in this stuff from a young age. And at that time, the attitude was still, we are superior. Animals are our inferiors. Animals aren't able to communicate. Anytime you assigned a human emotion to an animal, you were anthropomorphizing.
Mhm.
And or your dog, you see your dog smiling at you. You can, dogs smile. And it was like, no, you're just assigning that facial expression to the dog. And I, at that time, found it amazing that we could live so closely with animals and cut ourselves off so thoroughly. I think that was a product of the 20th century and our ideas of superiority and technology and the things that have actually led us into a lot of trouble. I mean, it's made our life fantastic in many ways, and we can sit here and talk to each other on
Mhm.
Zoom, but it's also cut us off from so much richness.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot to think about there. You think you're hitting on something. Why don't you write a book, Carlyn? Come on now.
I'm not an author, but and actually I guess I should bring up why I have so many animal um samples here. So one of the things that I got interested in doing several years ago was starting an imprint in Post Hypnotic Press. So Post Hypnotic Press is quite eclectic, as I mentioned. It's got a lot of nonfiction. I have self-help. I actually published all of Gabor Mate's books in audio.
Ooh.
And that his was some of the first books we published. And now Random House has bought the audio, and they're now the publisher. And there have been little changes made to the audio and stuff. He's added chapters. But we're very proud and pleased that we had that opportunity because I'm a huge fan of Gabor Mate's. So anyway, so we had this quite eclectic catalog, and I got very interested in animal audiobooks specifically. And so I've been building a little imprint called Animal Audiobooks, and it includes the two that we've just listened to. There's a book we just put out called Kinship with All Life. That was published in the 50s, I think. And J. Allen Boone, he wrote about animal communication. And the book itself is talking about his relationship with Strongheart to begin with. And that actually goes back to like the 20s because Strongheart was the first movie star dog. He
Mm.
was the very first dog. He was White Fang, silent film, stuff like that. He came over from Germany. Nobody knew him. And then he became this huge star, like to the point where they took him on tour across America in a train. And people flocked to greet Strongheart. But he was this amazing dog. And Boone was a fantastic, charming writer. So that was one of the books we put into that imprint. We have a series coming along, which we're going to hear. The last sample we have today is also an animal audiobook, and it's fiction. The other ones, we had started with fiction, we had some nonfiction, we're going back to fiction. And this series is called The Horses. Well, it starts with The Horses Know,
Mhm.
and it takes place in a futuristic world where horses and humans communicate psychically, and the horses are the ones reaching out and communicating with humans and helping them to steer a better path than the previous path that kind of, it's sort of like it's not a dystopian future, it's a positive future, but it's a future far beyond the technical reality that we live in now. um, so
I love that because, well, we can talk about this after we listen to this clip from the book, but it feels to me to be very like you were talking about, um, like the history of horses having watched the history of man and trying to pass on to mankind, to humankind, uh,
mhm.
the things that we've seen in your history and maybe how to avoid some of those things.
That's it exactly. Trying
Yeah.
to steer humans down a different path, not going back to um, a path of fear, really, is what
Yeah.
she's talking about, and a path of more acceptance. Um, and it's fiction, right?
Hmm.
But I think she's talking about some kind of a balance between trying to control the planet to the point that only we are comfortable,
Hmm.
and an acceptance of some a trade-off here. We don't need to have pesticides killing every bug because a bug might sting you.
Hmm.
And how do we balance that, right? Um, we don't need to try and every time something happens that's accidental happens, like for instance pit bulls, right? Pit bulls have had this huge terrible reputation because a few owners aren't good pit bull owners. But pit bulls themselves are really sweet dogs if they're properly brought up and they're trained properly. They're very sweet dogs. um, so I guess in her world, she doesn't talk about pit bulls, but it's like every time something bad happens, we don't have to try and eradicate every instance of that thing that
It's like
made
the
the bad
animal
thing
cancel
happen.
culture.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Um, so that's what the horses are trying to steer us away from, trying to control everything because of our fear and our need to keep entirely safe and to accept some balance with the
Mm.
world.
Well, I think this will be yet another treat that we are able to listen to this evening, Carlyn. So I think we'll bring up the cover art
Okay,
because you have a cover art for this one as well.
right.
And like the two before it, I'll get you to do a little quick description of what's up here. Folks are curious.
Okay, so on this one, in the top right corner, we have a picture of Emily Gray. She's the narrator. She's narrated a lot of wonderful series. She's a fantastic voice. Then beside her is the cover of The Horses Know. So do we want me to describe the people as well? Emily's blonde, long-haired, light-skinned person. The Horses Know cover shows the piebald mare. So we see a close-up of the horse's face, really the eye and part of the nose. And then behind we see more of a, what would you call that, like a shadow picture of another horse. And then below in the bottom is one picture, and that is the author, Lynn Mann, with her horse that inspired this book. And also a piebald mare. Beautiful horse.
Can you just tell us what the horse looks like, color-wise?
Well, a piebald mare is white and black. So this horse, she's got a white face and black markings on her back and around her, I can't really see, at the top of her head. So that's what a piebald mare is, a white and black horse, generally, with a little bit of markings around their face and then patches on their torso.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I think his horses come in all colors and patterns. Kind of reminds me of a giant cow when I think about the black and white
That's
cow.
right. Yes, I was going to say that, and then I thought, well, then I have to describe the cow. But yes, exactly. Very much like a cow.
Awesome. Awesome. The pattern repeats in nature. I love it.
Yes.
Okay. Well, this clip is about 17 minutes long, and it's our last audio clip of the night. And then Carlyn's got a really lovely offer for folks in this space. So I hope that you'll stay connected and do a little Q&A and get to know what the offer is. I don't want to spoil it in advance. So let's have a listen to this audiobook. Rick, when you're ready, please hit play.
Something was pulling my mind away from the herb and in a different direction entirely. Strange. I tried to pull my awareness back to myself with the intent of redirecting it wholly back to the herb, but found that I couldn't completely. Whatever had caught at me had no intention of letting go. I relaxed my attention from the herb. Immediately, my mind was pulled so strongly that I felt it was being pulled loose from my body. I was so shocked that I rolled off my heels and sat down firmly on my bottom, trembling. It was as I tried in vain to get control over my mind, to pull it all back, to join the part of it that was anchored in my body, that I registered the gentle warmth, the love, peace, and wisdom that was my mare. The sense of her that had always been at the edge of my mind, untouchable, unreachable, but always there, was now in my mind with me. She filled all my senses as she touched, no, melded my mind with hers, and pulled it towards herself. A vague part of me registered that I was being tugged. My mare was calling for me as I had waited so long for her to do. I stood up and began to run to catch up with my mind, as I felt it stretched even thinner between my body and hers. The undergrowth snagged at me, but I paid it no heed and blundered on until, eventually, I emerged from it into the more densely growing trees. Here there was less undergrowth, and my path was easier. I ran for all I was worth. It was a strange sensation to be running full pelt through the woodland with only a tiny part of my mind belonging to my body and registering what was happening. The rest of my mind was with her. Nothing had any relevance in my life any more except finding her. I ran until my lungs heaved and I had to lean on a tree to regain my breath. Then I was off again, running towards her, running. At some point, the tiny part of my mind that still looked after my body realized that it was getting dark and that hunger pains gnawed at my stomach. I was exhausted, but still I wanted to carry on. My body could recover once I had found her. Everything would be all right once I had found her. By now, I had reached open countryside, and the moon was bright in the night sky. I continued, but slowed to a walk as my body began to protest more strongly. At some point, I must have dropped down, exhausted, and fallen asleep. I woke up the following day with the sun high in the sky. I was as cold and damp as the scrub in which I was lying, and I cursed myself for sleeping so long. I had no idea where I was, and I didn't care. Within minutes, I was up and running again, following my mind to my horse. Every now and then, I thought I felt her pushing at me slightly, and my mind seemed to contract as it bounced back to me. But I flung myself straight back to her and forced my body to try to keep up. I was vaguely aware that my body was now extremely hungry and thirsty. I was stumbling a lot, and twice I fell headlong, landing once on my hands and knees and once on my chin. The blood from my chin dribbled down my neck and dried to a crust, but still I pushed my body to carry on. At one point, I reached a stream and fell down on my knees to drink until my thirst was slaked. Then I carried on. As luck would have it, I collapsed next to some brambles that night and ate my fill of their ripe, bursting berries, my mind still full of my horse. I could feel that she, too, crossed open country, and for the first time in her life she was alone. She missed her mother and her herd, but she was intent on finding me. Her body wasn't hungry or thirsty, so I immersed myself even more fully in her as I tried harder and harder to ignore the protests of my own body. She was concerned about something, and again I thought I felt her push at my mind. I fell asleep and dreamt of her resting peacefully under some trees. I don't remember much about the next few days, apart from feeling an urge to run, but being mostly reduced to a stumbling walk. I must have come across more streams from time to time, as I remembered drinking. I pulled fruit from trees and ate as I lurched my way towards where I knew my mare was. But it wasn't enough. As the sun made its way down behind the hills in front of me one evening, my legs gave in. I landed in a heap in some long, reedy grass and was unable to make my body get back up. My head was spinning, and my vision kept coming in and out of focus. My hunger pains were intolerable, my chin throbbed, and the skin on my knees and the palms of my hands was shredded. And still I was desperate to continue. I had felt my mare's concern increase over the past few days, and she had kept pushing at me with what felt like increasing determination, which I found hurtful and confusing. I was sure that if I could just reach her, everything would be explained and it would be all right. At the present moment she was frantic. What was wrong? Was she ill? Was she lost? No, she couldn't be lost. She just had to keep heading towards me. What could it be? I howled and cried with worry and frustration. This wasn't anything like how I had imagined going to find my horse. I must have passed out. My next memory was of waking and being aware how cold I was. I couldn't feel my arms and legs, and when I tried to lick my lips, they cracked. Immediately in front of my eyes, there were long stalks of grass and legs. 6 of them. How strange. Did I know of any 6-legged animals? No, I didn't think so. 2 of the legs wore black leather boots with buckles at the ankle, and 4 of them were black and hairy. I came to a little more. My mare! I had to get to my mare! I tried to move my mouth to tell the legs how important it was that I get up and start walking again, but nothing came out. Just as I was losing consciousness again, I felt arms underneath my body, and then I was lifted, carried, and put down heavily on my front across something warm and hairy. I sank down into the warmth, my arms and legs dangling, and let the blackness take me. The next time I regained consciousness, I was still draped across the back of what I decided had to be an animal. I had black hair brushing against my mouth, and I could see a black, hairy belly hanging down in front of my eyes, and my feet were on the other side of it. We were moving, I decided, as my hanging arms and legs swayed from side to side. Something warm and heavy covered my back. Most of my mind was now anchored back in my body, and it felt as if my mare were leaning against it somehow, holding it there. She felt calmer now, but her concern remained. I was being carried towards her, and I was warm. As that thought took hold and comforted me, I once again let go of conscious thought and sank into oblivion. Some time later, I found that I was stationary and lying on my back. My vision wouldn't focus properly, but I thought I could make out branches above my head, and I definitely smelt the moist, earthy smell of the forest, combined with the smell of smoke from a fire that crackled near my feet. Someone cupped my head in a hand and lifted it, and warm soup touched my lips. I opened my mouth and savoured the taste of onion soup. "That's it, slowly," a female voice said kindly. "You don't want to burn your mouth. You're in enough of a state as it is." I sipped slowly, although my every fibre wanted to gulp it down. Once I had finished, my head was gently lowered back down to the ground, and I slept once more. I dreamt of my piebald mare cantering along the side of a grassy hill in the moonlight. Her long, white, wavy mane lifted and dropped as she flew gracefully through the night, and every hair on her body reflected the silvery light of the moon. She was calm, focused, and very determined. I stirred as one particular member of the dawn chorus, a crow, I think, cawed from the branches above my head. As I drifted back to sleep, I dreamt that my mare was drinking thirstily from a fast-flowing, shallow river. She was aware of me and lifted her head, ears pricked as water dripped from her muzzle. I reached towards her with all of my being, but she blocked me and pushed me back, allowing only the smallest thread of my mind to stay with her. Hurt and confused, I nevertheless relished my contact with her. I felt as if everything would always be all right if I were with her. I needed to be with her. That was it. I needed to travel to where she was without delay. I came awake with a start and sat up feeling dizzy. "Want some more soup?" I looked up, and my eyes almost focused on a figure sitting across the fire from me. She was stirring a pot of what smelt like the same soup that I had been fed the day before. "Yes, please. Thank you for helping me. More soup, and then I have to go and find my horse. I'm being tugged," I explained. "First things first. Get some of this down you." She handed me a bowl of steaming soup. I tried to look up at her to smile my thanks, but found that all of my effort was needed to take the bowl and spoon from her. I recognized her black boots with the buckles at the ankles, and my mind returned to the day before. "There were 6 legs," I said, "and only 2 of them were yours. Who do the other 4 legs belong to?" "They belong to Oak, and magnificent legs they are too, don't you think?" I nodded dimly, not really taking in what she had said. I decided to concentrate on getting each spoonful of soup to my mouth without spilling any. After I had finished the last spoonful, a hand with some bread appeared in front of me. I took the bread and began to eat, wondering if I was really awake and eating, or whether I had passed out again. It wasn't long before I found out, as I was briefly aware of the bread falling from my hand before I fell out of the conscious world yet again. I don't know how long I was left to sleep before I was gently shaken awake. "Do you think you could sit up and ride in front of me if I hold you?" asked my rescuer. "Ride? I can try," I said, fighting to keep my eyes open as they tried to close. "Oak will lie down to make it easier for you to get on his back." Hands appeared under my arms and heaved me up onto my feet. "Right. Step astride him, and then sit down slowly and gently onto his back. That's it. Now Oak is going to stand up. Hold on to his mane and lean forward. I've got you." One arm appeared around my waist and held on tightly, and another reached past me and held on to a chunk of mane. There was a lurching sensation. "Well done, Oak. Are you ready?" she said into my left ear. How long we rode, I have no idea. I just focused on trying to stay upright and awake whilst sensing what my mare was doing. She had lain down to rest for a while and had then spent some considerable time grazing. Now she was on the move again at a steady trot along a muddy track. The same calm determination drove her onwards, and the comfort I felt at knowing that we steadily approached one another was immeasurable. We stopped for lunch at the edge of a stream, and I was helped down from Oak's back to sit at the water's edge. I leant forward and cupped water in my hands, splashing it onto my face and rubbing it into my eyes in an effort to fully open them. The palms of my hands felt as if they were on fire, and I was shocked at the sight of the red water that ran back to the stream. "It's just from your hands and your chin, nothing serious," I was informed. "I bet it hurts like mad, though, and you'll have to wait until we get to Coolridge to get cleaned up properly." Some bread and a large chunk of cheese appeared in front of me. "Thank you," I said. "Where's Coolridge?" "About 5 miles north from here. We'll be there later today. Oak is having to go more slowly than usual with 2 of us to carry." Once I'd eaten, I was again hauled to my feet and led to where Oak lay down to enable me to mount. As he lurched once more to his feet with me on board, I had my first proper look at my rescuer as she held firm to my leg to support me. Taller than I, she was dressed all in black, complete with a hooded black cloak. She had her hood up, but I caught sight of black hair around her pale face before she swung herself up behind me. I was lulled into a doze by Oak's movement and the warmth emanating from his broad back beneath me. My mare also rested, although not as peacefully as did I. She felt vulnerable and came to full alert at every sound, and I worried for her. Once more I tried to reach to her with more of myself, and once more I was pushed back. I was prodded to wakefulness by a finger in the ribs. "Wake up now, we're here," said my rescuer, and she disappeared from behind me. I was helped down from Oak's back and managed to land on my feet. I put my hand to his side. "Thank you, Oak." I rubbed my hand over his fur and put my heart into my words. "Thank you. He says you and your horse are very welcome, and he hopes you find a way to control your mind. Your horse has been struggling to keep you in one piece," the woman said from behind me. Shocked, I spun around to face her and then staggered back to lean against the ever-tolerant Oak. "What does Oak know about my horse?" "He knows that she's okay. She's on her way to find you and is taking good care of herself, unlike you. She felt you lose your mind soon after she tugged you, and she's been frantic. She asked Oak to help you, as she was still some distance away, and Oak was the closest bonded horse. He told me we were needed, so he came to find you. The rest I'm hoping you'll tell me, once you've had a decent meal and a good night's sleep." With a snap, my world came back into focus. "You're horse-bonded, and Oak is your horse," I said solemnly. The black eyes in the pale face smiled along with her mouth. "Thanks for telling me. I'd never have known. Welcome back to the land of the living. I'm Rowena."
And that was The Horses Know, or a sample, I suppose I should say, from The Horses Know. Now I'm interested. I want to hear the rest of the book. No spoilers.
Yeah.
But I can see why you love this content so much.
Yeah, it's a lovely story. It's really delightful, and as you heard, that's when they're horse bonded, and that's when her horse tugs her, and she just loses it. So it's a fun chapter. She's stumbling through the woods trying to find her horse, and yeah. So it's
And
it's a lovely book.
horses are one of those animals that have captivated the hearts of human beings.
Yeah,
Always.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, for a long time. I don't know the research around horses, but there was a theory that came out of Australia that we didn't domesticate dogs; they domesticated us.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder too, with our relationship with horses, if there's not something in that too, that it wasn't so much humans going, "Oh, we're going to domesticate this
Yeah.
animal," as much as a partnership that developed over time and changed both of us.
There's a lot of sense to, I think, what you're saying. Leave it to humans to take all the credits. Take all the
So
credit.
true. I love Emily's voice. I love everybody that we work with, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I can't say that I love her voice more than everyone else's, but I'm so glad to have an opportunity to work with her. She did a series of books that Thursday Next, I can't remember the author's name because I'm not really sure how to pronounce it when I see it in writing. But they're Thursday Next novels out of England. And they're a really fantastic set of books for any book lover because they're set in this world that is, I don't even know how to describe it. You'd have to listen to it, but the world of books is like a separate world where they're like engineering the book in your mind as you're reading the words. They're playing the parts, and it's just so much fun. And this concept that he has allows him to draw from all of literature and meld it all into this fun, romp of a book. And that's where I discovered Emily. I was listening to those, and so I love those books, and I'm really pleased to have an opportunity to work with her.
When you, because you said this about Hayden Panettiere as well, which was, that you reached out to her,
Hmm.
right? You reached out to Emily. How difficult or easy is it to reach out to folks? Maybe they're like uber celebrities.
Well, I haven't worked with any uber celebrities except for Hayden Panettiere, and there, I tell you, I was terrified. So
Mm-hmm.
most of the time, you're getting in touch with an agent, and I've gotten in touch with agents about other celebrities too. And most of the time, I haven't gotten very far. I
Mm-hmm.
did have Michael Imperioli. He did some narrating in a book we published about Abby Hoffman by Jack Hoffman. It's a biography by Abby's brother Jack. And Dan Simon, the publisher in New York, Seven Stories Publisher Press, he knows Michael. So that made reaching out to Michael a little bit easier for me. And the amount of audio was about an hour throughout the whole book. Um, Michael came in and he read the dialogue from Abby just because we wanted to kind of bring Abby's voice to life in these
Mm-hmm.
biographies. Um, so I've reached out to celebrities. You get in touch with their agent and you make an offer. And normally, I don't get very far because I often just can't come up with what I need to
Right.
to work with somebody like that. Hayden was because of her love of animals, and she had a look at the books, and she wanted to do the project. And other than that, I don't think we probably would have gotten very far. But she was really interested, and she loved the project, and I loved working with her. Um, I didn't know very much about, I mean, I'd read some stuff in the news and stuff, but I found her to be charming and cooperative and really concerned about doing a really good job. So,
Mm.
and then like Emily, sometimes when I'm reaching out to people, so Emily was narrating in England and I think in New York. And her and her husband have actually kind of retired to Texas. And she hadn't done any narration recently. And I couldn't find an agent. I actually sleuthed and found her. And I found her through an article about her husband and a theater company he used to own. And like it was really, and I found an old phone number related to that theater company, and I thought, what the hell? I'm going to
Yeah.
try it. And he still has that number. So I was able to get in touch with her. So it's really it depends. A lot of the time, though, I'm reaching out to an agent, and the agent is the person that I'm dealing with. Although also in the audiobook world, there are a lot of really well-known narrators, and you reach out directly to them.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so it really depends on the person, on the job. Um,
I have so many questions. I have so many questions. But I just want our audience to know that if you have questions or comments, that the space is also yours to be able to chime on in. And of course, the hands are popping in already, which I totally expected was going to happen. So I'll let's start with Lori, and then we'll go to Tammy.
Audio now unmuted.
There's Lori. Come on in, Lori.
First, I want to say, how do I find the books about the horses and also the Tuesday Next? Because I love those type of books. I'm an avid reader and I love, anything with England and with horses and stuff like that. So I live in the States, so you can tell me how I could find them. I would really be grateful.
Okay, so are you looking for print or the audiobook?
The audio.
Audio, yeah.
And are you an Audible member?
Yes, I am.
They're all on Audible.
Oh, great.
And
Because I got
then
like 15 credits I can use with Audible.
yeah, so you could definitely find them on Audible. And then the other thing, if you want to support an indie publisher, you can also buy the Horses Know book directly from our website.
Okay.
And that's posthypnoticpress.com. And oh, actually, I should say that you can't do that yet. They're still exclusive on Audible. So go find them on Audible for now. Eventually, we will make those available on our website as well.
But they're part of your offer tonight, are they not, Carlyn?
Yes, I am going to give out some copies for free. So that's a possibility too.
What is the name of the book of the horses again?
It's called The Horses Know.
The Horses
and the
Know.
author,
As in
the
K-N-O-W.
Okay,
yeah,
I was going to ask
right.
which way it was spelled.
Yeah, and that's Lynn Mann.
Okay, well, I'll just go by the title of the book, and then the other one is called Thursdays Next, is what you said?
Yeah, the series is Thursday Next, and there's a whole bunch of books in that series. So if you look up Thursday Next on Audible, that series will come up, and I think there's like 6 or 7 books in the series. I'm not sure.
Good. But I like series. I read a lot of really good authors that I like, but I always like to have somebody new, because a lot of my authors that I do like haven't put anything out new in a while. So, and I don't
really enjoy those books. They're just a delight.
Yeah, and I don't mind rereading, but I like to have something new. And I've been reading audiobooks since 1986, and I can't put a book down when I start reading.
No, that's great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lori. Okay, let's go to Tammy and then Megan and then Nancy.
Hi. I really enjoyed the books. The one thing I like about audiobooks is I can read or listen to an audiobook. I still say read, even though I listen to them.
Yeah, we read.
While I'm cooking in the kitchen and just doing stuff around, because I can still pay attention to the books while I'm doing those things. And it's funny when people ask me, well, how do you have time to do all these, reading books and things? And it's because with audiobooks, you can do them while you're kind of doing things, but you're still listening. They're close by, but I guess I have that ability to kind of multitask, I guess. But my question is, what's that? Sorry? Yeah.
That's
I
the
can
magic
multitask.
of audiobooks. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess I didn't come at the beginning, so I'm sorry if I'm asking something that maybe you've already talked about, but are you I don't quite understand the whole, I know because you just talked about Audible now. So I know that audible.ca, I guess, or .com is you can get a lot of books on Audible, but is your company like an Audible, or is it more of a publishing company? Or how does it all fit together, all these different places?
Right. So Post Hypnotic Press is a publishing company. When I started out, I was looking at the United States as a model because there were no publishing. In fact, we were the very first audiobook publishing company in Canada. Just around the same time, Iambic started up a few months later, but they didn't last. I don't think they're around anymore. So when I was starting up, there was nothing except for models in America to look at. And what we found there was companies like Recorded Books or Tantor Media.
Oh, yeah, Recorded Books, yeah.
Yeah, companies like that. They were, AudioBee, dedicated audiobook publishing companies where that's all they did was publish audiobooks. So that was the model that I took, and I started I'm in Vancouver area. I'm
I'm Vancouver too. Yeah.
Yeah. So I started publishing audiobooks. This would be in 2010. And I published about 40 Canadian books and some really great stuff. We published Carmen Aguirre's Something Fierce. I mentioned earlier, we published all of Gabor Mate's books, starting with In the Realm of Hungry Ghost. I was so excited to get that book. I can't tell you. That was like one of the first books we published. We published Terry Gould's Murder Beyond Borders, and it had a different title in the United States. I'm trying to remember, or was that the United States title? That was a really fascinating book where he went around to 5 countries talking to and trying to investigate when journalists are killed. Because we often think of, like, we know journalists might be killed in a war zone, but in fact, it's very rare that a journalist is killed in a war zone. They're often killed because they're pursuing corruption at home, and the corrupt people they're pursuing kill them. So he went around to investigate these journalists who had been killed in the pursuit of their story, and they had pursued the story knowing they were in danger of being killed. And he was really fascinated with that. What compelled them to keep going, even though
Okay.
they knew they were in danger? Anyway, back to your question, though. So that was my model. I started publishing. Yeah, I do go off on tangents. I'm sorry
No
about that.
worries. No,
Um,
no, no, no,
so I
no
started
worries.
publishing audiobooks. I tried to publish Canadian books specifically. I published about 40, some really great stuff, but I was 10 years too soon for audiobooks in Canada. So after about 40 books, I started to expand and look at other stuff, and still continue to work with Canadian publishers and publish Canadian books that came along that I was interested in. But that was the model. So I've continued to do that. I have tried to dip my toes, I should say, into print and ebooks. That was my history. Before I started publishing audiobooks, I had a background in print publishing. So ironically, I knew that better than audiobooks, but I've never really done that many books in print and ebook, although I have done a few, like favorites of mine, Main Street, Sinclair Lewis, where I've added new introductions. I had Richard Langerman. I'm blanking on his name. Wonderful biographer of Sinclair Lewis, write an introduction for us. And Sally Perry, who was the head of the Sinclair Lewis Foundation for 25 years, wrote an introduction for the audiobook. So I do things like that, but I'm mainly focused on audiobook publishing. I have distribution on my website, but then, like any other publisher, I distribute widely with Audible and other audiobook publishers.
And do you connect with the public library, like the various public
We're
libraries as
available
well,
through
or?
Overdrive and Hoopla, which puts us onto a lot of
Oh,
the
okay.
library system.
Oh, great. Okay. So you're readily available, which is great. Okay.
Yeah,
Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah.
you're welcome.
Thanks, Tammy. Okay, let's go to Megan, and then we'll go to Nancy. Give Megan a moment to unmute.
With that.
Oh, there we got you.
Anyway, that was awesome. I love the horses know. Kind of reminds me of the horses. I started therapeutic riding once a long time ago. And it was awesome. And I had this horse I really liked. Her name was Stormy. I'm like, Stormy's a really cool horse. For me, I had to go on the ramp because the horse was really high and I was really short. So, but I bonded really well with him. I remember of a horse called Black Beauty. Oh my gosh. Oh, I loved it. Loved it. I like the other one too, especially the Amy and Gables, but I had to leave because I had to do something. But I love the horse one. Man, it was awesome. That was awesome. I loved it. I also remember me of when you said A World of Books. I remember me of a movie that I watched. What I have is about this girl from England. You know, her mom is in England. They go to between England and Italy, and this girl somehow reads a book, and all of a sudden her mom disappears, and all of a sudden all these characters come out of her book, and they're all around her and all that stuff, and she has to stop what's going on, and about this all fantasy world become into being. That's just completely and apparently when she finishes, the only way she can stop it when she reads a story, something happens and her mom comes back. Apparently, when she reads the story, she had the power to read stories, and in that story, she had the power to bring the characters to life.
That sounds interesting.
Oh,
Don't tell us too much, Megan, though. You don't want to spoil it if somebody wants to check out the book.
Well, it's not an audiobook, it's a movie. It's a movie.
Wow, still, if they want to check out the movie.
I don't know what it's called, though. But I loved it. I loved the horse one best.
That's wonderful.
Yes. Yes, thank you.
Okay,
Thank
we're gonna
you.
go to Nancy, and then Lori's got a hand up, and maybe it's another question, or maybe it's a oops, I forgot to put my hand down, but we'll find out in a moment. Nancy, you're up, my friend. Give Nancy a moment to unmute. While we're waiting for Nancy, you started off by saying, Carlyn, that you have quite a diverse repertoire of books.
Audio now unmuted.
Oh,
Hang on, Nancy. We got you, but I just want to get Carlyn to answer this question first. How many audiobooks have you got in your collection?
About 150 in our catalog.
Mhm.
And then I've produced a lot of books for other companies and self-published authors. But in our specific catalog, about 150 at this point.
Awesome. Okay, Nancy, you're up, my friend.
you asked the question. How many books? I was going to ask that
Oh,
question.
did ya? I stole your thunder. But you gotta have something else you can share.
Question. I really enjoyed that you pronounced, like you said something about the Canadian, the first one. I like the idea that you brought up the more Canadian words in the, the story. And then the crow one. I love the crow one because I always talk to my granddaughter about what happened to my grandmother, when all the crows followed her all the way. And she kept feeding them, and then when she died, hundreds and hundreds of crows were singing for her at the funeral. And then when I heard about the crow, oh my God, I would like to get that book. Or is it in a book and an audio? Because she's 18 months, and when I read to her anything, she already knows when to flip the page, because I'm hearing and wait till a sound comes on. None of the books say to turn the page. Why is that?
Because there are no pages in audiobooks.
Well, no, but I need a book with her because she likes to look at pictures too, right?
I know, but that's why it's just not in the audio. Unless there are some books that you can buy that have a little tiny audio speaker in the book for kids, and that might tell you to turn the page. But I think it's because they assume that people who are doing it have eyesight to be able to see when you.
Because she's only 18 months, and I feel like I'm blind, and I'm reading. I'm trying to read her story, but she gets boring because I'm not flipping the page, or she's already finished the story, and I'm still talking about the story. But I just want to know if is there such a thing that, after, like when you do audio, like for something for them to see what the pictures are, like imagining these pictures, right?
There's when I was at this conference in San Diego recently, there was a fellow, I wish I could remember his name, I'm not prepared. He was talking about a project that he has going, and I'm really fascinated, and I want to work with this guy in the future. So what he's doing is taking and doing exactly what you're talking about. They're preparing books, and what they want to do is prepare a book so that it's totally accessible. So it would be like, especially a picture book. So they're going to take and they're going to video the picture book, and then you're going to hear the audio, but then they also have described audio, and they also have somebody signing for those who can't hear but need a signer. So they have all of it going on at once in these wonderful little videos they're creating, and it makes it totally accessible to anybody, and it's a really cool idea. Unfortunately, I should have thought to look that up.
Is that Richard Remar?
I'm not sure.
I think his company's called Imagine.
Yes, that might be it.
Okay, okay, get that from me. Oh, yeah. Oh, I'd love that. Yeah, I might as well start, if I'm not a reader, I've never read, and try to fake a story. My children will say, Mom, okay, I love you forever, my baby will be. I can read that till she, I read that ever since all my kids.
Munch.
Oh my God, it's like kept going on. Like, Mom, is that the only book you know how to read? I go, that's all I can read. But then audio came along, but then now my granddaughter wants me to, she's more smarter than I am, but she just loved listening to the music and the stories. And now I'm learning Braille, but it's not going the way I want it. But I thank you for sharing that. That's really nice to hear. You did a wonderful job. I can't wait to have your book out.
Well, maybe.
Gotta write it first.
Yeah, I gotta. Those two books.
Reactions button.
The two books that we were talking about, the When Animals Rescue and Inside Animal Hearts and Minds, there are ebook and print available, and even with the audiobook version that we published, there's so sometimes when we publish audiobooks, there's a lot of stuff that's in the book that we can't really contain in audio. Because we do a lot of nonfiction, sometimes that might be graphs and stuff, but in the case of these two books, they're beautiful books. There's the print, but they also have a ton of gorgeous pictures of animals. And that's available as a downloadable PDF that you can use when you're listening to the audio, but it's not married to the audio. But then those books are also available as ebooks. Although of course that's probably not going to help you because it doesn't have I don't, although you might be able to use something like speech to text or text to speech technology to use the ebook. I'm not sure.
It depends on how the ebook is formatted, probably, or what program it's on. But then you
Yeah,
have a computer reading out the book, and it's not as
that's right.
pleasant.
It's not as nice. And then of course, and I'm not the print publisher, so I don't know what they've done in terms of that or what's available.
Mhm.
Um, so that's not the ideal solution. That imagine that we were just talking about that's an amazing solution.
And they're,
Um,
from what I know from Imagine, because I've I had the privilege to do a few things with them. They mostly do like very, very young children's books.
that's right. They're focused
Very,
right
very
now
young
on
children.
picture books. Yeah.
Awesome. That's wonderful. So, the offer tonight for folks is that every one of you on this call is eligible to receive one of these audiobooks that Carlyn has shared. And all you need to do is email us and let us know which book that you'd like. And Carlyn has generously offered to have that available in an MP3 download. So you can play it on
That's
your
right.
computer, you can put it on your Victor Stream, whatever
Yeah.
technology works for you.
Yeah.
I
Keeping
love
in
that.
mind, everybody, that this is copyright material and
Hmm.
I'm making it available to you and trusting that you're not going to send it off and
Yeah.
share it
No sharing with the
widely.
wide world, just for
Yeah.
you. So let's honor that gift in the space. Which it's a very lovely offer, Carlyn. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Let's circle back a bit. You touched on a few of these things, which was how you choose the books that you want to publish into an audio format, and then how do you choose the right narrator for the book?
Okay. Well, so everybody's different. Most of the time, I'm really looking around and I'm looking for something that's going to speak to me that I'm interested in because
Hmm.
I'm old and I'm doing this because I love audiobooks, not, I mean, I came to this, like I said, at 50, and I came at a time when we were just fortunate enough because of the Vancouver crazy real estate, we were fortunate enough that I could start a company of my own.
Right.
And my goals when I started the company were employing actors, employing other people, and doing something I loved. And I've kept with that. So, in terms of the books, there's a whole bunch of different, like some of the books I've published have come to me because an actor has gotten a hold of me and said, I'd really like to do this book. Would you guys be interested? And I look at it and I go, hey, that's a really interesting book. Yeah, we'll see if we can get the rights. Actually, that reminds me, I was going to talk about, we had a category that I started to develop years ago called dream job books.
Hmm.
And this came out of me talking with Heather Henderson, who's also got a wonderful, rich voice. I had listened to her narrate Brain on Fire, which was about a journalist who she had a brain. I can't remember exactly what went wrong with her brain. It was some sort of a bacterial infection or something, and nobody knew what was happening. It just looked like she was going crazy until they finally discovered what it was. So this was her memoir, and Heather had narrated it, and I was so impressed with her voice. I had reached out to her, and we were chatting, and I said, "Hey, Heather, is there any book that you would narrate even if you never got a dime, like something that you're that passionate about that you would just want to do? You want a voice." And she had a list. I mean, she didn't have a book, she had a list of books. But her top choices were a wonderful BC book called The Curve of Time. And that was another one of the samples. I mean, I had so many crazy
You
samples for
sorted
this
through,
tonight.
yeah, it
I
felt
could,
like
yeah,
hundreds, all of them.
if I could, I would have said, let's play the entire catalog. But anyway, so The Curve of Time is a beautiful book. It was written by M. Wiley Blanchett. She had been widowed. She was living on Vancouver Island. She had, I think, 4 or 5 kids, and she was widowed when the kids were quite young. And everybody thought she'd come back to civilization. This is like 1927, I think, and Vancouver Island was fairly bare at that point. It wasn't the kind of built up the way it is now. She decided to stay on. She was a writer. She wrote for magazines and that kind of stuff. And during the summers, to make ends meet, she would rent out their house, and her kids would live on this little tiny 25-foot boat and sail up and down the coast of BC. And
Mm.
the book it's just stories from that. And they're not linear, they're just kind of woven together into this magical book. So that was one of the books she wanted to publish, and I obtained the rights for that, and we did that. And then that was so much fun. We said, well, what else? So the next one was The Egg and I. Now, The Egg and I was published in 1944, I believe, just after the war. And Betty McDonald, who's a Seattle writer, she passed away in the 50s. She was sort of thinking that maybe she'd sell 500 books or something. This book sold 1 million copies in 10 months. Those are big numbers today. In 1944, tremendous success.
Mm-hmm.
It was made into a film with Claudette Colbert and Fred McMurray. I don't know if anybody on this call has heard of the Ma and Pa Kettle.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that came out of The Egg and I.
Okay.
That was where that series came out of. They were characters in The Egg and I. And in fact, the people that those characters were loosely based on sued Betty McDonald later on, but that's a whole other story. Um, so anyway, that was the second book that we published. That took us a while. I contacted the agent, and the agent is like 100-year-old agency in New York, and we were a brand new company at this point. And they were like, no, we're not working with you. You're brand new. Not going to happen. So for 2.5 years, I just kept writing to the agent at this agency that I was in communication with, and saying, well, any change of heart? We've published these books now. We've published this now. And it took 2.5 years, but finally they softened up and said, all right, you can have the rights to The Egg and I. We actually got the rights to all 4 of Betty McDonald's memoirs, The Egg and I, The Plague and I, where she talks about her year in a tuberculosis sanatorium. Anybody Can Do Anything, which is about the Depression and their time during the Depression, and Onions in the Stew. And they're all extremely funny. She was a really wonderful writer. So we ended up doing all of those together. And then you were just asking me, where do books come from? Well, that same agency contacts me from time to time if they have a book they think would really fit our catalog. And so we've just signed Elizabeth Bennett's Rewriting Illness, which is a memoir about her journey through cancer. And we're just about to publish that. We'll be recording it in New York with the author. So yeah,
this
they come
one,
to us.
This one will be narrated by the author then.
Yes, this one will be narrated by
How
the
often
author.
does that happen?
It depends. With memoirs, it's a lot more common than it is with fiction, but not always. So I don't really have a number in front of me. I haven't really sat and crunched that. But I would say, especially with memoirs, it's more likely for the author to narrate it than not, but not always. I remember being asked by people, why didn't Gabor Mate narrate his own books? His son, Daniel Mate, narrated them and did a fantastic job. He's got a wonderful voice. He had read all the books many times as his father was writing them. And so that worked out really well. But Gabor Mate, who's a fantastic public speaker, really entertaining. If you've ever seen him, if he stops to read from a book, it's not necessarily the greatest. Like he's just not, that's not his skill set.
Not his jam.
Yeah, it's not his skill set. He's a great public speaker and a brilliant man. And, I just love his work. But in the end, I think Daniel did a much better job narrating. And in fact, they just co-wrote a book together, Atlas of the Heart. I think it's, no, that's not it. Atlas of the Heart is Brene Brown. Oh, I should remember. I'm going to just check on my Audible if I can pull it up, because I got to be able to remember this. But it's a great book, and they co-wrote it, and Daniel has narrated that. And what's it called? I don't have my glasses on. It's hard to see.
We lost you on your camera too.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, maybe your battery's low.
Yeah, my battery's really low. Okay, I am not finding it in my library, unfortunately. I guess I read so many books that it's already way back.
Listen, I've been super impressed by how you remember all of the names of books and authors that you've done so far, because my brain's like a sieve sometimes with that stuff.
Well, that's a funny thing because before I started publishing audiobooks, I'm going to open this door. It might be a little bit loud, but I am dying of the heat in here. Um, Before I started to publish audiobooks, I was a huge reader, but I would remember what the book was about and maybe the title
Mm.
or maybe the author. But putting them all together, no, I couldn't do it. It was very rare that I could remember all three at the same time. And when you want to discuss books with bookish people and you can't remember all those details, they
Yeah,
look at you like, "Did you really read that book?"
yeah, yeah,
know?
yeah.
So when I started listening to audiobooks, that was one thing that really struck me that I hadn't expected because I had been so resistant to audio too. All of a sudden, they were all in the same place in my brain. I would remember what the book was about and the title and the author and the narrator.
Mm.
And I think that that was just interesting. I think it's just that audio actually works better for me. I even find that I probably retain more of the book, although that was never a big challenge for me. But I do. It just for some reason it just sits in my brain in a different way than reading does.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Some people are very much print-based learners, and some people are
Hmm.
audio-based learners.
Yeah. Well, one
Yeah.
of the reasons when I started this company, my husband's an actor and a big reader. He's a bibliophile. So we have a library of probably about 5,000 books, and most of that is his collection, started when he was 7. So when I was starting this, I thought, well, this is great. We'll be able to do this together. I'll get Mike in the studio reading all the time. And you know, nowadays he reads a lot more, but for a while there, it was like being married to a plumber. Your pipes are always leaking.
Yes.
And, but that was one of my inspirations too, was because I enjoyed listening to him narrate so much. And he is a great narrator. And I was reading him some of the reviews of his books, getting him all enthusiastic about getting back into the studio again. So.
Oh, that's a lovely little anecdote. I love that. Okay, so we've had quite a sampling. I'm sure this will not be the last time that you're back in this space because we have a lot of avid, as I said before, avid readers in this space. And so it's nice to be able to share what you've got in your library, point people to that direction. You've also made a very nice offer to give somebody a book should they want a choice of one of these books. That's a very, very lovely offer. So I'm so pleased to have you in the space. It's
Well,
really been a gift.
it's been a lot of fun. And like I said, I'd love to come back because we have so many books and I'm enthusiastic about pretty much every one of them. That's why I sent you so many samples. It was
I
really
know,
hard for
right?
me to
There's
narrow my scope.
so many choices, so many choices. Maybe one of the last things I just want to ask you is about because there are some folks in this call that may be self-writing, self-publishing.
Hmm.
If you have any advice in terms of how they can perhaps create an audiobook out of their work. I mean, it could be a book of poems, it could be a novel, it could be anything, right? A memoir.
Hmm. Well,
Is there a
we
way
help.
for, yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
we help a lot of authors publish their own books and they come in and record with us. Like this booth has seen several authors come in and narrate. Um, One of the other things we want to do, so one of the reasons we want to establish a new location with a cooler booth and the 2 booths is to work with the big guys. But we still also want to support self-published authors.
Mhm.
So when we work with self-published authors, we'll often, it's expensive. To produce an audiobook is expensive. It's a lot of hours in the studio. There's a lot of work that goes on after you've recorded, and then more work even after you've recorded. You have to come back in the studio, record again, etc. So what we've done with some authors who maybe don't have the budget to do it is that we can even train people to come in and work by themselves to record the book.
Mhm.
We've trained people how to proof their own book so that they take that instead of paying us to proof it. We just try our best to find ways to help authors come in and record their own book. Now, some of the authors that we work with, it's not an issue. They can come in and they can afford to pay for us to do all of the work. But if you're an author who can't, we can try and find ways to help you get that book into audio. We've even had help authors set up a recording space at home. That's a lot trickier. We've had authors come to us who have spent hours recording their book and they want to come to us and do the post production. but they've sat in their living room and they've recorded their book on a USB mic, and we have the sad business of telling them that nobody's going to be able to save this book.
Yeah.
It's you have to meet a certain level of quality before it's going to go out to distribution. And so, if you're a serious author, you want to meet that level of
You want
quality.
professional quality. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
But that said, there are ways to set up at home and to achieve that quality for not too much money. But it's a lot trickier because so say you manage to set yourself up with a small space that's going to work for you to record. Can you keep that space the same for the next month?
Hmm.
Well, you record and you have to come back and record. Uh, Everything is so important. Like, for instance, I'm sitting here moving around, but if I'm a narrator, I wanted that position, especially between me and my mouth and that mic, that's got to stay really consistent. That was something that took me a while to learn. My brother kept having to correct me over and over again because I'd let the narrators move back and forth like this as they were
Hmm.
talking. And
Hmm.
that, that makes it impossible for us to master and make the audiobook sound good in the end. So there's so
Sounds
many
like
technical details.
it sounds like narration could be really good for somebody who's a very strong Braille reader. As long as the turning of the pages doesn't become a thing, right? But you have to turn pages when you read a book, anyways.
No, nobody turns pages anymore.
Yeah.
We all read off of a tablet.
So you can read off of a Braille display because
That
if
would
you're reading
work.
with your fingers, you're not looking down at a tablet. You're like your position to your mic is pretty consistent. I
That's
would
actually that's actually a really interesting idea. I didn't know that you could read Braille off a tablet, so that's really cool.
Yeah, if you've got a little Braille display device, you can plug it into another device that has just text English, and I'm sure there's some software and some stuff that's involved, and other people can speak more to that. But it's not impossible. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I bet that would actually be really great because then you're not turning any pages, and like you said, you're not actually looking at a page. So now you're totally focused on where you are with the mic. That would probably give you a real advantage as a narrator.
Well, you never know. Maybe you'll have to get some blind narrators on your team.
I'd love to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never even thought of that. I'm not equipped for that here, but I'm certainly open to learning.
That's all a person needs is to be open to learning because this world changes minute by minute, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, and the technology, a lot of people are, especially in the audiobook world right now, narrators who have spent years building a career are terrified of AI
Hmm.
because there's a lot of talk of AI voices replacing narrators. I don't think it's going to happen. Even now, with the best AI, they
Hmm.
don't sound like people. They don't interpret the language properly. One of the
No.
reasons I prefer to work with actors over pretty much everyone else is that actors spend their time learning how to interpret text and so that you can hear what the meaning is. And that's a gift. That's a real skill. Not a gift. It's a talent and a skill that they develop. I don't think AI is ever going to catch up with the human ability to do that. At
Well,
least
and
I
the
certainly hope not.
yeah, and the ability to just vary your voice subtly for different characters that are speaking, right? It
Hmm.
may be subtle, but it's enough nuance that the listener goes, "Oh, this is Matthew speaking, not Anne
Yeah.
speaking," right?
But
Yeah.
you see, I could see AI going in through a male voice and a female voice and adding different voices, but can it interpret the language
Yeah, there's
properly?
an inflection and a tone and a like
Exactly.
smile behind the voice, all of those things.
Yeah. Well, for instance, I publish a lot of nonfiction, and some of it can be quite complicated.
Hmm.
And there are times where I've been doing the quality control listen, and I'm walking along, I'm walking my dog, multitasking, and listening to a book, and I'll run across a sentence that nobody's picked up because nobody understood what they were saying.
Right?
And so the actor has not said it correctly, and the proofer hasn't caught it because the words are correct, but it's not said correctly. It's not making any sense, and you can tell that that the actor is struggling. And I hear that, like I hear that right away. So we'll go back and re-record it, right? Or I hear that when I'm engineering and directing with an actor, that there's a um, just something that they're not getting in that sentence, and they need to hear that. That's just an example of how important that inflection is. Most of the time, actors aren't asking me for that help. I'm not saying that that happens all the time, but that's a skill that AI doesn't necessarily have,
Mhm.
that ability to read and inflect, and through that inflection convey deeper meaning.
And it is true that people who are reading books with their own eyeballs, sometimes, I mean, I remember when I was reading books with my own eyeballs that I would read something and I'd go, oh, no, read that line again. Right?
Yeah.
Because you're like, oh, I missed the comma in there. That doesn't make sense. Oh, now it makes sense.
Yeah,
Right. So sometimes,
exactly.
or it's a big word, or you're trying
Yeah.
to figure some stuff out. It's a clunky sentence, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Oh, and clunky sentences. Now that's another topic altogether.
Yeah.
When you do have some people, especially with dense nonfiction, where it could be better expressed.
Mhm.
And can I tell one more story?
Sure.
Okay. Do you know the author of Lemony Snicket?
Not personally.
No, but
I am aware of the
Lemony,
book.
I can't remember his name, Daniel something, Lemony
Yeah.
Snicket. So Tim Curry narrated the first 2 books in that series.
Mhm.
And then Daniel Chambers. Anyway, Daniel, the author, was so impressed with Tim Curry, was so taken with the audiobooks that he got really excited and he wanted to narrate them himself. So he went into the studio and he narrated the next 2. After the next 2, he went, what am I doing? And he gave the series back to Tim Curry because he realized that he wasn't Tim Curry and he was never going to be Tim Curry. But the experience taught him that from then on, it really taught him a lot about books and writing. And from that point on, he said, I've never published anything without reading it thoroughly out loud again, because reading those books out loud taught me that my writing needed to improve and I needed to read these things out loud to get a really good product. And that's a really good advice for any author, really, whether you're going to narrate it yourself or somebody else is narrating it. Reading your work out loud can often find those clunky sentences for you and really help to elevate your writing.
That's also very good advice. We just had a workshop here with VocalEye called My Mother's Story.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's Marilyn Norrie.
Marilyn Norrie, yeah.
She taught a 4 or 5 week set of workshops to our community members, and people were writing their own stories. And so it's great advice when we do the workshop again to be able to say, all right, friends, if you can read it to yourself out loud, read it to yourself out loud, or let's have somebody else read it and you listen back to it and just see where the clunky is. Because everybody's writing, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, it's all of us, right? I mean, I've been learning slowly but surely to just not be so damn wordy. I'm not learning that when I speak yet, but I certainly have started to make headway in my writing. And I'll write something and then I go through it and cut half of it out again, because I just tend to be way too verbose.
That's fair. Sometimes you need, what do they call that? The word vomit. Just vomit it all out on the page, then you got to go back and edit it.
Yeah.
Well, this has been lovely, Carlyn. Thank you so much for sharing your work, your journey with Post Hypnotic Press in this space, the lovely offer you've made to our guests in this space. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining us on this VocalEye Almost live event, and we hope to have you back sometime soon.
Audio now on.
That would be lovely. I thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope next time when we do this again, we're going to be doing it from our new location in a cool booth.
Oh, I think that'll definitely be a thing. You can introduce us to your new space.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Awesome.
VocalEye, vocaleye.ca. Special thanks to our funders, the Canada Council for the Arts, the British Columbia Arts Council, the Province of British Columbia, and the City of Vancouver.